Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Echoes of the Forgotten Depths. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a dim orange glow across the rugged terrain of the old mining town. I had always thought of it as a ghost town, a place locked in time, where memories lingered like the dust that coated every surface. The town had long since abandoned its glory days, leaving behind dilapidated buildings and rusted tools that whispered stories of the past. But there was one thing that kept drawing me back, the mine. The entrance loomed in front of me, an uninviting gash in the hillside that seemed to breathe out a chill, even on this warm autumn evening. A copper sign swayed in the faint wind, its letters faded and peeling, but I could still make out the warning about the dangers within. I had heard the stories, the tales of miners who had never returned, their spirits said to wander the tunnels. Yet, it was those very stories that ignited a flame of curiosity in me, one that drove me to explore the depths of that cursed place. As I stepped closer, the shadows lengthened, and I pulled my jacket tighter against the creeping coolness. The entrance beckoned to me, an insatiable void that promised both discovery and danger. My heart raced, excitement mixing with a hint of dread. With each step, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, a suffocating reminder of what had come before. With a flashlight in hand, I crossed the threshold, the beam slicing through the darkness. Dust motes danced in the light, and the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and mildew. I had read about the mine's labyrinthine passages, but standing there, the vastness of the cavern felt insurmountable. I took a deep breath and plunged deeper, the familiar sound of my footsteps echoing ominously around me. The first few minutes were uneventful, the walls glistening with moisture as I moved along a narrow path. I paused occasionally, running my fingers along the rough stone, letting the texture ground me in reality. But as I ventured further in, the air thickened, and an uneasy feeling crept over me. It was a sensation I had never quite experienced before, a knowing that I was now alone. I shook off the thought, attributing it to the eerie stillness that came with being so far underground. Pressing on, I stumbled across old mining equipment, rusted and forgotten. A pickaxe lay abandoned at my feet, its handle splintered and the head tarnished. I felt a strange pang of sorrow for the lives that had been entwined with this forgotten machinery, their hopes and dreams reduced to mere relics. As I turned a corner, the passage opened into a larger cavern, and I paused, mesmerized by the sight of glimmering crystals embedded in the walls. My flashlight illuminated them, casting fractured rainbows on the stone. In that moment, I felt a sense of wonder, as if I had stumbled upon a secret unclaimed by time. But the reverie was short-lived. A sudden rush of cold air swept through the cavern, extinguishing my light for a split second. I instinctively fumbled for the switch, my heart pounding as darkness enveloped me. When the beam flickered back to life, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the oppressive silence suffocating. A sense of urgency gripped me, and I turned to retrace my steps, unease gnawing at my insides. That was when I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably there. It was a low, intermittent scraping, like something dragging along the stone floor. My pulse quickened, and I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But curiosity held me in place, rooted to the damp earth as the sound grew louder. Compelled to investigate, I crept forward, my breath shallow as I advanced toward the source. As the scraping intensified, it morphed into a series of rhythmic thuds, like the heartbeat of the mine itself. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel the temperature drop further, a chill seeping into my bones. Just as I rounded the next corner, the thudding stopped, plunging me into an oppressive silence that throbbed in my ears. I raised my flashlight, the beam quivering as it illuminated the rocky path ahead. And that was when I saw it, a shadow darted across the corner of my vision, fleeting and almost indistinct. I swung the light toward the movement, but nothing stirred. My fingers trembled, tightening around the flashlight as I scanned the cavern walls, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. With each moment that passed, the feeling of being watched intensified. I forced myself to breathe steadily, focusing on the flickering light and the cool air that chilled my face. Yet, in the quiet, a whisper taunted me. It was a soft voice, echoing in the recesses of my mind, weaving in and out of clarity. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a plea, a warning. Turn back, it seemed to whisper, the sound entwining with the dampness of the cavern. Panic surged, and I stumbled back, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. I turned to head for the exit, the urgency now overwhelming. I didn't need to understand the voice, I simply needed to escape. But as I retraced my steps, the thudding resumed, louder now, reverberating through the walls as if something was following me. I quickened my pace, dread pooling in my stomach as I raced toward the entrance. The shadows danced menacingly around me, and the air thickened, making every breath feel like a struggle. Just as I reached the narrow passage that led back to the outside world, the scraping returned, closer than before, a relentless pursuit. I could feel the chill on my back, a breath of ice against my skin. I bolted, fueled by adrenaline, racing toward the light that promised safety. The mine's mouth loomed ahead, and I pushed myself harder, bursting through the entrance and into the open air. I stumbled onto the ground, gasping as I looked back into the shadows. The mine yawned behind me, silent once more, as if it had never harbored anything at all. But deep down, I knew better. That voice would linger in my mind, and the memory of whatever dwelled within those walls would haunt me long after I had left. I had escaped, but the darkness had not let go. Not yet. The darkness pressed against the walls of the mine like a living entity, oppressive and suffocating. I had barely descended a few hundred feet when a chill danced along my spine, the air thick with an unseen weight. My flashlight flickered, casting uncertain shadows that twisted and wriggled on the walls, each flicker igniting a fresh wave of dread in me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, willing it to stay lit as the echo of my footsteps faded into the abyss. I had come down here seeking remnants of the past, a relic tied to the stories of lost miners and whispered legends. The old tales spoke of a tragedy that struck 2 decades ago, when a section of the mine had collapsed, trapping a group of men below ground for days. They were never found, swallowed by the yawning darkness. I had always been curious about their fate, but I never thought I would venture so deeply into those cursed tunnels myself. As I moved deeper, the walls of the mine began to pulse with moisture, and the air grew damp and heavy. Each breath tasted stale, carrying the scent of earth and decay. My breath quickened, and I felt the flutter of anxiety in my chest. I had come alone, perhaps foolishly, but the thrill of discovery had overshadowed any warning bells that should have sounded in my mind. I continued down the narrow corridor, ignoring the nagging voice that whispered for me to turn back. The tunnel branched out ahead. I hesitated, scanning the walls for any sign of what lay in either direction. The left path appeared to be more traveled. Remnants of old gear littered the ground, rusted tools and wooden beams, the remains of a miner's diligent work. The right path was darker, less inviting, as if it led to secrets best left undiscovered. Against my better judgment, I chose the right. The deeper I went, the more the mine seemed to close in around me, as though it were alive and aware of my intruding presence. The walls narrowed, and the air turned colder. I could hear the distant drip of water, a slow, rhythmic sound that seemed to echo the beat of my heart. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet trembled, a low rumble that vibrated through the solid rock, sending a cascade of loose stones tumbling down from above. Panic surged through me. I felt the instinct to flee, to sprint back to the surface and leave this cursed place behind. But a glimmer caught my eye, a flash of something metallic nestled against the side of the tunnel. I moved cautiously towards it, driven by curiosity despite the rising panic. As I approached, my flashlight illuminated the object, a broken miner's lantern, caked in layers of dust and cobwebs. The glass was cracked, but I could still see remnants of old oil inside. It felt significant, like a tether to the men who had come before me. I reached out and brushed off the dust, revealing a faded name scratched into the metal. Eli Thompson. The name echoed in my mind, a reminder of the stories I had read. Eli was one of the miners trapped in the collapse. I felt a shiver creep down my spine. It was as if his spirit lingered in this dreadful place, watching my every move. I fumbled in my pocket for my journal, eager to jot down my findings. The flashlight flickered again, and I cursed under my breath. Just as I began to write, a sound emerged from the tunnel, a low, sorrowful moan that sent ice through my veins. I froze, my pen hovering above the paper, breath caught in my throat. The moan echoed off the stone walls, growing louder, more desperate. It was immediately followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, as if something was dragging itself toward me. Instinctively, I turned off my flashlight and pressed against the cold rock wall, blending into the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, a savage drumbeat that threatened to betray my presence. The footsteps grew closer. I strained to listen, every nerve in my body heightened. I could hear the faint scraping against the ground, the labor of something or someone moving through the darkness. It felt unreal, as though the mine itself had come alive, conjuring specters to haunt me. Just then, a shaft of light pierced the darkness from the other tunnel. Someone was coming. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by dread. What if they weren't human? What if they were one of the lost miners, transformed by the darkness into something unrecognizable? My instinct screamed for me to run, to flee back the way I had come, but my legs were frozen in place. The light flickered as the figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, disheveled, covered in dirt, and looking as though he had just clawed his way up from the depths of hell. His eyes were wild, darting around as if expecting to be attacked at any moment. I opened my mouth to call out, but the words caught in my throat as I caught sight of the blood on his hands. "Help me," he rasped, his voice a haunting whisper that felt all too familiar. "They're coming." Before I could respond, the mine trembled again, and from the darkness behind him, I heard a cacophony of disembodied voices rising in unison. The sound was a chorus of despair, mingled with the echoes of the past, men who had once worked these tunnels, now lost beneath the weight of their own tragedy. I stumbled backward, my back pressing against the cold rock. The light in his eyes flickered like my dying flashlight, and I knew that I had ventured too far into the heart of darkness. The mine was hungry, and it would not let me go without a fight. The hollow sound of dripping water echoed in the tight corridor, each drop amplified against the oppressive silence that enveloped me. I pressed my palm against the cold, damp stone wall, feeling the uneven surface beneath my fingertips, and tried to steady my breathing. It was hard to tell how long I had been in this darkness. Time melted away, lost in the shadows. After discovering the hidden entrance to the mine, my curiosity had swallowed me whole. I had convinced myself that the stories of the miners who vanished decades ago were nothing but superstitions. Now, I wasn't so sure. The air was thick with an unsettling chill that wrapped around me, as if the cave itself were alive, breathing in sync with my rising dread. I tightened the grip on my flashlight, its beam flickering nervously as if fearful of what it would illuminate. The narrow passageway twisted and turned, revealing nothing but more stone and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. I had ventured far deeper than I had intended. The thrill of exploration had turned sour, morphing into an overwhelming sense of being watched. I could almost feel the eyes of the miners pressing down on me, judging my intrusion. I paused, listening intently. The distant sound of a scuttling noise made my heart race, each beat echoing in my ears like a war drum. I turned, aiming the beam of my flashlight down the corridor, but found nothing but shadows. My mind raced, conjuring images of faces that had once occupied this darkness, perhaps still lingering in its depths. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping thoughts. I was alone, no one would come for me. With each step, the corridor became narrower, the walls seemingly closing in. I could feel the tightness in my chest, an instinctual warning coursing through my veins. I had learned from my father, an old miner himself, never to venture too far from an exit. But the thrill of discovery had led me further than I intended, and now the compass of my courage had begun to spin wildly. As I pressed onward, I stumbled upon an open cavern, and my flashlight flickered to life, illuminating the space. The walls glistened with moisture, the ground uneven and littered with what looked like projectiles of rock. It was beautiful in a horrifying way, the kind of beauty that made your stomach churn. My eyes scanned the room, landing on an old wooden cart, rusted and half buried under debris. Drawing closer, I could see remnants of mining tools scattered across the floor, each one a testament to the lives that had been consumed by this dark place. I knelt down, my fingers brushing against an old helmet, its leather strap cracked and worn. It felt wrong to disturb this graveyard of forgotten souls, yet an inexplicable urge made me continue searching. What had happened to them? The question haunted me, gnawing at my instincts. Suddenly, the scuttling noise returned, louder this time. My heart dropped as I stood, scanning the vast cavern with growing panic. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was not alone. I felt it, the presence lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling in the stillness. The echo twisted back to me, mocking my feeble bravery. I cursed under my breath, wishing I had brought someone with me, a friend, a partner. But I had come alone, driven by the desire to prove that the stories were just that, nothing more than the ramblings of town drunks and old wives. I turned to leave, but a sudden crash echoed from deeper within the mine, reverberating off the walls and sending a wave of terror rippling through me. I hesitated, my pulse racing as I fought the urge to flee. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, pushed me forward. I had to know what had triggered that sound. Treading cautiously, I journeyed down another narrow tunnel, the air growing colder with each step. The darkness thickened around me, swallowing my light until it felt as if I was moving through a viscous, black fluid. I could hear my own breath, shallow and quick, mingling with the soft whisper of the wind that seemed to beckon me deeper into the abyss. As I rounded a corner, I was met with an unexpected sight. A shaft opened up before me, revealing crumbling wooden supports and gaping holes leading into unfathomable depths. It was a dismal sight, one that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I stepped closer, the beam from my flashlight revealing dust motes dancing in the air, yet I could not shake the feeling of being observed. Then I saw it, a silhouette against the far wall, dark and unmoving. My heart stopped, I could hardly breathe. Something was there, but it was more than just a shadow. It shifted, the outline taking on a form that was unmistakably human, yet wrong. It had an unnatural quality to it, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the darkness. I took a step back, but the floor crumbled beneath me. I stumbled, barely catching myself against the wall as panic surged within me. The figure moved, shifting slightly as if disturbed by my presence. I turned to run, the terror fueling my legs as I sprinted back down the corridor, my flashlight beam bouncing chaotically on the walls. I could still hear the scuttling noise, echoing after me, growing louder, closer. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something rancid, like rotten flesh. I lunged for the exit, my heart racing as I felt the darkness clawing at my back. The deep shadows of the mine seemed to reach out, trying to pull me into their cold embrace. I burst into the cavern where I had first entered, but now it felt altered, as if it had shifted when I wasn't looking. The entrance loomed like a gaping maw, and I could hear the scuttling behind me, relentless and eager. Just as I reached for the light of the outside world, a chilling voice broke through the darkness. "Leave this place." The warning echoed in my ears, and I didn't hesitate. I raced toward the light, fueled by sheer terror, desperate to escape the horrors that lurked within the depths of the earth. The chill that gripped my spine was unlike anything I had ever felt before. After the incident with Claire, the heavy silence in the mine bore down upon me, amplifying my dread. I could hardly breathe, a weight of despair settling in as I stared at the darkened tunnel ahead, which seemed more a gaping maw than a passageway. The flashlight beam quivered in my hand, the light flickering against the damp, uneven walls, illuminating patches of jagged rock and glistening moisture that dripped rhythmically onto the ground. I turned to speak to Mark, seeking some reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere. But when I glanced back, the expression on his face sent a jolt of fear through me. He was staring into the shadows, eyes wide, as if he could see something that I could not. His lips moved, forming words that barely broke the silence. "We shouldn't have come here." A wave of unease washed over me. "What do you mean?" He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the darkness behind me, where the shadows danced and twisted. I felt compelled to turn and look, but the terror of the unknown paralyzed me. I could almost hear the dark calling my name, whispering promises of secrets buried deep within the earth. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Let's just go back. We can find another way. We don't need to push deeper." He seemed to snap out of his stupor, shaking his head vigorously. "No. We have to find Claire. We can't leave her." The weight of his words settled between us, thick and suffocating. I followed him as he took a tentative step into the tunnel, my heart racing. We pressed deeper into the mine, the light from our flashlights barely cutting through the thick blackness. Every echo of our footsteps bounced off the walls, a constant reminder that we were not alone in this place. Minutes melded into hours as we navigated the narrow passages, marked by rusted tracks from a bygone era. An oppressive silence filled the void, an absence of even the slightest sound that made my skin prickle. I focused on the hope that Claire would be around the next bend, that somehow, against all odds, she was waiting for us. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us further into the bowels of the earth. My flashlight flickered again, and I fumbled with the batteries, my heart racing. In the moment of darkness, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I froze, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath against the suffocating air. Mark paused, his face tense with concentration. "What?" "I don't." A distant sound echoed through the winding tunnels, like the faint cries of someone in distress. My blood ran cold. "It's her. It has to be Claire." I sprinted forward, pushing past Mark as I raced towards the source of the sound, desperate for any sign of her. The walls pressed in, the air heavy with mustiness and despair. I felt myself slipping, my footing uncertain on the uneven rock, but I pressed onward, drawn by the haunting cries that echoed from deeper within the mine. "Wait." I heard Mark call, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. In my mind, Claire's face flashed before me, eyes wide with fear, crying out for help. The tunnel finally opened into a larger chamber, the ceiling high and cavernous, illuminated only by the flickering beam of my flashlight. I scanned the area, my breath hitching in my throat as I took in the sight before me. Jagged rocks jutted out like the teeth of some ancient beast, and in the center, a small pool of still water reflected the faint light, its surface disturbed only by the occasional drip from the stalactites above. "Claire!" I shouted, desperation fueling my voice. Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a moment, the only sound was the pounding of my heart, echoing in the vast emptiness. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back and retrace my steps, but I couldn't abandon her, I wouldn't. Then, in the silence, I heard it again, the faint sound of her voice, echoing from somewhere beyond the chamber. It was softer now, a whispering plea that seemed to swirl around me, pulling me further into the mind's depths. "Claire!" I called out again, urgency lacing my voice. I stepped closer to the pool, its surface still and dark, yet something shifted beneath it, an unsettling ripple that sent a chill down my spine. My flashlight flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls, momentarily hiding the jagged outcrops and the pools of darkness pooling at their bases. It was then that I noticed something floating just beneath the surface, a flash of white, a shape that stirred my stomach with dread. Gulping down my panic, I leaned closer, the beam of my light cutting through the inky water. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was fabric, torn and soiled, the unmistakable remnants of Claire's jacket. "Mark! Come here!" I shouted, my voice thick with horror. He rushed into the chamber, and the moment he saw what lay before us, his face drained of color. "No, no! This can't be happening." In that instant, the air shifted, a suffocating darkness creeping from the corners of the chamber, wrapping around us like a shroud. I felt it, a malevolent presence lurking just beyond the edge of our light, watching, waiting. Panic surged through me, clawing at my throat as I backed away from the pool, dragging Mark with me. "We need to go. Now!" But as I turned, the shadows shifted, coiling around the entrance we had come through, blocking our only way out. The darkness thickened, swirling and pulsing as if it were alive, and I could feel the weight of terror closing in. "We have to fight it," Mark gasped, his voice quivering. "We can't let it trap us here." With a surge of adrenaline, I raised the flashlight, the beam cutting through the encroaching darkness. But as I shone the light towards the tunnel we had come from, a figure emerged, a grotesque silhouette, framed by shadows so deep they seemed to consume the light. It was then I understood this mine was no ordinary place. It was a predator, and we were the prey. The air inside the cave was thick with a dampness that clung to my skin like a shroud. I had descended deeper than I intended, the jagged rocks pulling at my jacket, urging me to turn back. Yet, the further I ventured, the more I felt an inexplicable compulsion to press on. Each step reverberated in my ears, a hollow echo that was quickly swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I remembered the stories I had heard in town, the old miners who spoke of the cave's cursed nature, tales woven with threads of madness and despair. When I had first stumbled upon the entrance, I laughed off the warnings, dismissing them as mere folklore. Now, the cold sweat on my brow and the quickening of my heartbeat told a different story. I paused, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dim light filtering through the crevices above. The walls glimmered with moisture, reflecting the faint beams of my flashlight. As I swept the light across the cavern, I caught sight of something glistening on the ground. I knelt, curiosity overriding caution. It was a shard of a miner's helmet, its surface rusted and caked with dirt. A chill ran through me as I recalled the tales of those who had never returned. I picked it up, examining the dent that marred its surface, imagining the impact that had sent it flying. A shudder washed over me, and I placed the helmet down, forcing myself to breathe slowly. As I rose, I thought I heard something, a faint whisper, a sound that didn't belong to the cave's natural ambience. I paused, straining to listen, but the noise dissipated into the silence like smoke in the wind. Shaking my head to clear my thoughts, I pressed on, deeper into the maze of rock and shadow. The atmosphere shifted, thickening with an unworded tension that pricked at my instincts. I was now alone, the sensation clawed at the back of my mind, a gnawing realization that sent my pulse racing. After what felt like hours, I reached a larger chamber, the ceiling stretching high above me like the belly of a great beast. Stalactites hung precariously, glistening with moisture as if they had been weeping for centuries. I aimed my flashlight towards the far wall and my breath hitched. There, etched into the stone, were crude drawings, figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, their mouths silently screaming. I took a step closer, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots amplifying the stillness. The images were eerily reminiscent of the town's history, the miners who had vanished, the families left behind, the tales spun into legends. I could almost hear their cries, resonating through the cave as a mournful reminder of the past. It was then that the whispers returned, this time clearer, a chorus of lost souls calling out for help. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stumbled back, my flashlight beam wavering. I turned to leave, but a flicker of movement at the edge of my light caught my attention. I squinted into the dark, my breath quickening. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small and fragile against the fastness of stone. There was no response, only the echo of my words bouncing back at me, mocking my audacity. I stepped backward cautiously, the sensation of being watched prickled along my spine. Suddenly, a loud crack reverberated through the cavern, as if some great weight had shifted above me. Dust and small stones rained down, and instinct kicked in. I ran. My feet pounded against the rocky floor, the flashlight beam dancing wildly ahead of me. The whispers turned into frantic shouts, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my sanity. I could hardly discern what they were saying, but the desperation was palpable. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. My pulse thundered in my ears as I raised the flashlight, momentarily illuminating the path behind me. Shadows flitted just beyond the edge of the light, twisting and writhing like tendrils reaching for me. Panic surged, and I pushed on, every instinct screaming for me to escape. As I turned a corner, I crashed into a solid figure, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I staggered back, the light flickering over the form in front of me. It was a man, disheveled and wild-eyed, caked in dirt and grime. His mouth moved, but the words were drowned out by the chaos in my mind. "Help me," he choked out, his voice ragged. "They won't let me go." A spike of fear shot through me. He was just another lost soul, trapped in this hell of stone and shadow. Before I could respond, his gaze darted behind me, sheer terror etched on his face. "They're coming. You have to run." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned, the whispers crescendoing into a maddening chorus as I sprinted away from him. The cave twisted like a living entity, the air thick with despair and the weight of unseen eyes bearing down on me. I felt the darkness close in, the walls vibrating as if the cave itself mourned the souls it had claimed. I had to escape. I had to find the way out before it was too late. The shadows surged, threatening to swallow me whole as I barreled through the darkness, the whispers growing louder, clawing at my mind. Just when I thought I could run no further, I spotted a sliver of light ahead. My heart soared as I dashed for it, desperation lending me strength. But as I neared the exit, the ground shifted beneath me, and with a terrifying roar, the cave quaked violently. I stumbled, tumbling forward into the light, and the last vestiges of darkness closed in behind me, sealing the horrors within. Breathless and trembling, I fell to the ground, the cool air of the outside world washing over me. But the whispers remained, echoing in my mind, a haunting reminder that the cave would never truly let me go. Story 2, Veil of the Cursed Summit. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks as the chill of evening crept into the air. I had always sought solace in the mountains, a refuge from the chaos of my life. But as I stood on the edge of the craggy cliff, staring down into the yawning abyss, I felt a sinking dread settle in my stomach. It was a feeling that lingered from my childhood, when campfire tales of the mountains came alive, warning of darkness that lay hidden just beyond the reach of a flickering flame. The whispers of those stories echoed in my mind now as I surveyed the valley below. I was alone, as I had intended, but the silence felt oppressive rather than comforting. The trees, their leaves rustling like distant voices, loomed over me, casting long shadows that danced across the rocky ground. I had come to hike, to escape, yet I felt trapped under the weight of a darkness I couldn't quite name. Earlier that day, I had met a couple of hikers at the trailhead. They were friendly enough, with their laughter cutting through the nervousness that always came before a long trek. We exchanged pleasantries and shared a few tips on the best routes to take. They spoke of a hidden lake rumored to be a gem among the peaks, a place where the water was so clear it reflected the sky like a mirror. Their enthusiasm ignited my own spirit of adventure, and I promised to seek it out. As I ventured away from the trail, I caught fleeting glimpses of the lake's beauty, but with each step deeper into the woods, the path became more treacherous. The sunlight thinned, struggling to penetrate the thick canopy above. I heard the distant sound of water, but the closer I got, the more it morphed into a haunting echo that seemed to mock my presence. I finally stumbled upon the lake, but it was nothing like I had imagined. The surface was dark and still, a glimmering blackness that seemed to swallow the fading light. I crouched at its edge, peering into the depths, and for a moment, I thought I saw something beneath the surface, something moving just out of sight. A chill shot up my spine, and I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the waning light. As I stood up, the forest felt different. The trees were no longer just trees, they had transformed into sentinels, watching with unseen eyes. The sounds of the woods shifted, as if the very air had thickened with tension. I turned to leave, but something compelled me to take one last look at the lake. That was when I noticed the figure at the far end, a stark silhouette against the dimming horizon. It was a person, or at least it seemed so, but they were too still, too silent. "Hello?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the stillness that followed. The figure did not respond. My heart raced, a primal instinct urging me to flee. I turned on my heel and hurried back the way I had come, a sense of foreboding wrapping around me like a shroud. The path back was a labyrinth of shadows, and I lost my sense of direction. The branches clawed at my jacket as I pushed through, the underbrush whispered secrets I could not comprehend. I stumbled, catching myself against a gnarled tree, its bark rough and cold under my palm. I paused to catch my breath, the sound of my rapid heartbeat thudding in my ears. As the sun finally succumbed to the horizon, the darkness thickened, wrapping around me like a hand closing in. The air felt charged, crackling with an energy that was unsettling. I knew I had to keep moving, but every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs set my nerves on edge. I was now alone in the mountains. I could feel it in my bones. The stories of the hikers echoed in my mind. They had mentioned a missing person last year, someone who had vanished without a trace in these very woods. I had brushed it off as one of those urban legends designed to scare unsuspecting climbers. But I remembered their faces, the unease in their eyes as they recounted the tale, and now I understood why. I quickened my pace, the forest closing in around me, the trees whispering darkly as I navigated the increasingly twisted landscape. I could sense something behind me, a presence lurking just outside the fringes of my vision. I dared not look back. Instead, I focused on the pathway ahead, now obscured by the encroaching shadow. Each step I took echoed with a growing sense of urgency. The darkness deepened, swallowing the path, and I found myself stumbling in the gloom. My foot caught on a root, and I pitched forward, landing hard against the cold earth. As I tried to rise, panic surged through me, a primal instinct screaming for me to run. Then, I heard it, a low growl, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. My heart leapt into my throat, and I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The sound was close, dangerously close. I fought against the rising terror, forcing myself to listen, to detect any sign of what might be hunting me. As I turned to flee, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was not human, not anything I recognized, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. A chill coursed through me, paralyzing my thoughts. I was not just lost, I was prey, In that moment, the laughter of the hikers, their warnings, and the stories of the mountain all crashed together in my mind. All at once, the weight of my solitude shattered, and I realized I had ventured into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The air was thick with silence as I stepped out of the cabin, the wooden door creaking on its hinges behind me. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks, casting long shadows over the landscape. I could still hear the echoes of last night, the way my heart raced when the wind howled like a mournful animal through the trees. But now, there was only the sharp scent of pine mingled with the distant chill of the approaching storm. My instinct screamed at me to stay inside, wrapped in the warmth of the fire, but the lingering unease urged me to explore. As I made my way down the narrow path that wound through the forest, I tried to shake off the remnants of my fear. It was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind, or so I told myself. The locals had spun their tales of the mountains, stories of wanderers who vanished, of shadows stalking the unwary. But I was no superstitious fool. I was a rational person who knew the dangers of nature, not the dangers of folklore. The trees loomed over me, their gnarled branches twisting like ghoulish arms. I could almost hear them whispering, sharing secrets I was never meant to know. I brushed aside the unease and pushed deeper into the woods, where the sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy above. It felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me. I stumbled upon a small clearing, where the ground dipped into a shallow basin. At its center lay a crumbling stone well, partially hidden beneath a blanket of moss. I approached cautiously, my curiosity piqued. The well seemed ancient, the stone slick with moisture and time. An icy draft seeped up from its depths, caressing my face with a chill that sent shivers down my spine. I peered over the edge, but the darkness swallowed the light, revealing nothing but an impenetrable blackness. It felt as if the well were a gateway to another world, one that I had no desire to explore. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I turned quickly, but nothing stirred in the underbrush. My heart raced, and I took a step back, reminding myself it was only the wind playing tricks. As I turned to leave, the weight of dread settled heavily in my chest. I quickened my pace, the path seeming more treacherous, the trees more oppressive. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, and the shadows stretched longer and darker, closing in around me. I wanted nothing more than to return to the safety of the cabin, to shake off the creeping sense of foreboding that clung to me like a second skin. But the path led me deeper into the woods instead. It twisted and forked, and I found myself at a crossroads. To the left, the trail appeared well trodden, while to the right, a narrower path lined with thick undergrowth beckoned. I hesitated, a twinge of instinct telling me to take the familiar path, but something, an inexplicable compulsion, pushed me towards the right. The underbrush closed in around me, the air growing thicker, heavier. I could hear the distant sound of water, the soft trickle of a stream hidden somewhere within the foliage. I followed the sound, driven by curiosity. The path narrowed further, and with every step, I felt a growing sense of being watched. The prickling at the back of my neck intensified, and I fought the urge to glance over my shoulder. Finally, I broke through the dense thickets and stepped into a small, sunlit glade. The stream wound through it, sparkling like a silver ribbon. It felt peaceful here, a momentary reprieve from the weight of the forest. I knelt by the water's edge, splashing my face, trying to wash away the unease that had settled over me. But then I noticed something strange. Among the rocks and the scattered leaves, there were remnants of something unnatural, pieces of torn fabric, frayed and weathered, tangled in the roots of a nearby tree. My heart sank as I bent closer, recognizing the distinct pattern of a plaid shirt. It was the same pattern that had belonged to Mark, my friend who had vanished on this very mountain a year ago. Images of Mark flashed through my mind, his laughter, his reckless spirit, the last time we had been together. We had joked about the legends, dismissed them as fanciful tales spun to keep tourists in line. But here, In the depths of the forest, the reality of his disappearance hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the air grow colder, the warmth of the sun fading as I stood in that glade, grappling with the weight of what had been lost. I backed away from the stream, casting anxious glances over my shoulder as I retraced my steps. The peaceful glade faded behind me, the underbrush closing in once more. The dread that had hovered on the edges of my mind now swelled within me, suffocating and relentless. I hurried, a sense of urgency propelling me forward, the path twisting like a serpent. Every snap of a twig behind me sent a jolt of panic coursing through my veins. I could almost hear footsteps, heavy and deliberate, tracking my movements. I stumbled into the clearing where the well stood, the familiar stones now feeling like a trap. I dared not linger, not with the shadows lengthening around me. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound that sent every hair on my body standing on end. It was close, too close, and I felt the air go still as if the forest itself had paused to listen. I took a step backward, my heart thundering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A dark shape emerged from the trees, moving with a predatory grace. Panic clenched my throat tight, and I turned and ran, the whispers of the forest now a cacophony urging me onward. I had to escape. I had to reach the cabin. Each step felt like a race against time, and the creature behind me was relentless, its breath hot on my back. I could hear it now, a low growl that reverberated through the woods, and all I could think was that the stories were true. I was now alone in these mountains, and whatever was hunting me was hungry for more than just a tale. The wind howled through the narrow valley, a mournful sound that seeped into my bones as I trudged onward, the once comforting embrace of the mountain now feeling like a vice around my heart. The storm had intensified, dark clouds swirling above me, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. Each gust seemed to echo the warnings I had brushed aside, the local legends, the whispered tales of those who had ventured too deep into the wild. I had hoped to find solace in the isolation, to escape the memories that haunted me, but the mountains had other plans. It was as though they were alive, breathing, watching. The trees, skeletal and gnarled, loomed around me like monstrous shadows, their swaying branches resembling clawed hands reaching out to draw me into their depths. I quickened my pace, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots now a sharp reminder of my solitude. The path twisted and turned, and soon I found myself off the main trail, the landscape becoming more treacherous. I had turned back once already, but the thought of returning to the cabin where memories of laughter and warmth had turned sour was unbearable. I pressed on, my breath quickening with each step, the cold biting into my skin. I recalled what Nora had said before we separated, just remember, stay on the path. Her voice echoed in my mind, filled with a mix of concern and resolve. We had come here in search of adventure, to forget our troubles, but she had grown wary of the mountains, of the stories that clung to them like mist. I should have listened, but the thrill of exploration had consumed me. Now, the thrill was a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. As I navigated through the thickening trees, I noticed something lurking just at the edge of my vision. For a fleeting moment, I thought it might be a deer, but a deeper instinct pulled at me, urging caution. I slowed my pace, straining to see through the tangled branches. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a trick of my mind, a figure darted into view. It was gone before I could process it, slipping silently into the underbrush, leaving nothing but the rustle of disturbed leaves behind. My heart raced, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I whispered a name, half hoping it would be Nora. No answer came, just the eerie silence of the forest that swallowed my voice whole. I pressed on, hoping the figure was merely a figment of my imagination, but unease settled in the pit of my stomach. I could feel the mountain shifting, a relentless presence that watched and waited. As dark clouds descended, obscuring the last flickers of daylight, panic clawed at my throat. I desperately searched for a semblance of familiarity, but everything felt foreign and sinister now. The trees closed in around me, the shadows deepened, and I felt an urgency to find shelter before the storm broke. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center, a dilapidated cabin stood, its structure leaning precariously against the weight of the mountain. It looked abandoned, the wood gray and splintered, windows shattered like vacant eyes glaring back at me. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my instinct screaming at me to turn away, but a stronger force drew me into the need for refuge, the desire to escape the unrelenting storm. I pushed open the door, which creaked ominously on its hinges, and stepped inside. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered in through the broken windows, and a shiver ran through me as I surveyed the interior. Old furniture lay strewn about, the remnants of a life long abandoned. A fireplace stood cold and empty, its stone surround crumbling, the hearth dark and unwelcoming. As I moved deeper into the cabin, I found remnants of someone's life, a child's toy, a torn blanket, a rusted tin can. Something stirred within me, a whisper of unease that grew louder as I explored. I felt as though I were trespassing on sacred ground, as though the very walls held secrets that were not mine to uncover. I continued my search for anything useful, but the deeper I delved, the more profound my sense of dread became. My thoughts darted back to the figure I had glimpsed outside. What if it belonged to someone who had once lived here? Had they been lost to the mountains, their presence still lingering in the shadows? Suddenly, a low groan echoed from somewhere within the cabin, sending a shock of fear rippling through me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. It was not the wind this time, it came from deeper within the structure, a sound that resonated with despair. I wanted to call out, to see if there was someone else here, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I crept toward the source, cautious, each step reverberating in the silence. There, in the far corner of the cabin, lay a trapdoor, slightly ajar. The groan had come from beneath it, and instinctively, I stepped back, dread pooling in my stomach. Was it a trick of my mind, or was someone or something trapped down there? I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the curious pull of the unknown. With trembling hands, I edged closer, the air growing heavier around me. The storm outside raged on, a tempest that seemed to seep into the very bones of the cabin. The groan came again, more desperate this time, echoing through the stillness, compelling me to confront whatever lay beneath. As I knelt beside the trapdoor, a heavy silence enveloped me, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever awaited me below, and with a trembling hand, I reached for the door, ready to unveil the darkness that lay hidden beneath the cabin's floor. The sun hung low behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows that crept through the forest like whispers of the lost. I stood at the mouth of the narrow trail, the air thick with a strange stillness that made my skin prickle. The village had been behind me for hours, its quaint charm replaced by the foreboding nature that swallowed the mountains. I could feel the weight of the trees pressing down, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky as if in perpetual torment. I took a breath and stepped onto the path, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the silent wood. Memories of my friends flooded my mind, Lily's laughter, Mark's bravado, Sarah's nervous glances. They were gone now, victims of the wilderness that hungered for souls. I had to find them, or at least find out what happened. I owed them that much. The trail wound deeper into the forest, each step leading me further from the safety of civilization. An oppressive quiet enveloped me, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird, though the sound felt disjointed, unnatural. I pressed on, my heart pounding as the sun dipped lower, casting long fingers of twilight across the path. As darkness settled, the trees loomed larger and more ominous. I paused to pull out my flashlight, the beam slicing through the gathering gloom. The light flickered momentarily, as if hesitant to illuminate the encroaching shadows. I scanned the area, half expecting to see a familiar face peering back at me, but all that greeted me was the unyielding darkness. I recalled the warnings I had heard in the village, the tales of lost hikers, voices that called from the depths of the mountains, and shadows that moved on their own. Each story had been dismissed by those who saw the peaks as mere adventure, but I felt the weight of those words pressing against my chest. There was something here, something that thrived on fear and despair. Suddenly, a distant rustle caught my attention. My heart raced as I turned the flashlight towards the sound. The beam wavered, revealing nothing but a thicket of brambles. I cursed under my breath, chastising myself for letting my imagination spiral. It was only the wind, I reassured myself, though the chill creeping down my spine suggested otherwise. I pressed on, driven by a frantic need for closure. The trail narrowed, and the trees filled with a menacing density. With each step, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me, an invisible force urging me to retreat. But I pushed forward, calling out for my friends. Lily. Mark. Sarah. My voice echoed, swallowed almost instantaneously by the oppressive silence. Minutes turned into hours as I navigated the winding path, my hope dwindling with every unanswered call. The flashlight flickered again, casting the shadows into an eerie dance. I checked the batteries, cursing silently when I realized they were nearly spent. Panic gnawed at my stomach, and I turned back, desperate to retrace my steps. The way I had come felt foreign, swallowed by the darkness that had crept up behind me. In my frantic state, I stumbled upon a clearing, and the moonlight poured in like a silver bomb, illuminating a small, dilapidated cabin that seemed to have sprouted from the earth itself. The sight was both a beacon of hope and a source of dread. I felt drawn towards it, as if the structure held secrets too heavy to bear. I hesitated at the threshold, my breath hitching in my throat. The door hung ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, inviting yet foreboding. I couldn't turn back now, the memory of my friends urged me forward. Setting my shoulders, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was stagnant, thick with dust and the scent of decay. Moonlight streamed through the cracked windows, revealing remnants of lives long past, an overturned chair, a shattered picture frame, and a faded quilt lying in a heap. I shivered, glancing around as my heart raced with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Lily. I called again, my voice trembling. It echoed back, a cruel reminder of my isolation. The cabin seemed to pulse with an uneasy energy, as if aware of my presence. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed it aside and ventured deeper into the gloom. The main room opened into a narrow hallway lined with doors. I approached the first door, its surface marred by age and neglect. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but the need to know compelled me to push it open. The hinges squealed in protest, and I flinched as I stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a dusty bed and a small dresser. My eyes fell upon a torn journal lying open on the bedside table. I picked it up, flipping through the brittle pages filled with scrawled handwriting. Descriptions of fear, of voices that beckoned from the woods, jumped out at me. The last entry sent a chill through my bones. They are not what they seem. Do not trust the darkness. A crash outside made me jump, the sound reverberating through the cabin like a death knell. I dropped the journal, heart racing, and rushed to the window. The moon had disappeared behind a shroud of clouds, plunging the world into a deeper dark. I peered out, but saw nothing. The silence was louder than before, a foreboding lull that settled over the cabin. I turned back, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. It was time to leave. But as I stepped toward the door, a shadow darted past the window, something dark and wraith-like. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare take a breath as I strained to catch another glimpse. Then, silence. And then came the whisper. Soft, almost a caress, like the wind through the trees. Help us. My blood ran cold as the voices of my friends surged in my mind, begging and lost. The shadows deepened, closing in around me as I backed away into the room. I had to find a way out, but the cabin felt like a trap now. Before I could react, the door slammed shut, sealing me inside. The darkness surged, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent, pulling me deeper into their grasp. I was not alone. I never had been. The cold bite of the mountain air gnawed at my skin as I stood at the edge of the clearing, the last vestiges of sunlight slipping behind the jagged peaks. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in around me, the dark silhouettes of ancient trees casting long shadows that danced eerily with the fading light. The stories I had dismissed as folklore now crept into my mind, filling the silence with whispers of those who had vanished into these woods. 3 days had passed since we discovered the first sign of the old woman, the remnants of a campfire choking under a blanket of pine needles. Bob had insisted we follow the trail deeper into the forest, convinced that the rugged terrain would draw us closer to the truth about the missing hikers. I had hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but a morbid curiosity had spurred me on. What had happened to those who ventured this way before us? As we moved deeper into the mountain's clutches, the air grew remarkably still. The sounds of nature, birdsong, rustling leaves seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating silence that wrapped around us. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like creeping fingers. I turned to Bob, who was scanning the trees, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you ever get the feeling we shouldn't be here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced back at me, eyes wide with determination. "We owe it to them to find out what happened. We can't just turn back now." I felt a shiver race down my spine, wondering if I was betraying my instincts or if this was a misguided sense of duty. As darkness enveloped us, I fumbled with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick shadows but doing little to dispel the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. An unsettling noise pierced the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest. Bob froze, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely above a murmur. I don't know," I stammered, heart pounding in my chest. The growl came again, closer this time, reverberating through the air. Panic seized me, and in that moment, I could almost feel the eyes of something primal watching us from the darkness. We inched backward, our nerves fraying as the sound echoed again, this time, accompanied by a rustle of leaves. It was as if the forest had come alive, stirring with a presence that was decidedly not human. My thoughts raced, recalling tales from locals about the ancient spirits lurking in the woods, hungry for wayward travelers. "Let's move," I urged, but the words caught in my throat as I turned to lead the way. My flashlight flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows around us. Bob lingered behind, transfixed by something in the darkness. "Did you see that?" he whispered, pointing into the abyss. I squinted into the dim light, heart hammering as I spotted a figure in the distance, tall and gaunt, cloaked in darkness. It stood motionless, its features obscured. The air thickened with dread, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. "Bob, we need to go now." But he didn't budge, eyes locked onto the figure. It moved then, almost too fluidly, slipping between the trees with an unsettling grace. I felt a chill grip my heart, the horror of the moment crashing down on me like a wave. That's when I noticed the flickers of light, a distant fire, glowing like a beacon through the trees. It danced and swayed, casting uncertain shadows that beckoned us closer. "Look, a fire." I pointed, desperate for a sense of safety. Maybe it was someone else out there, another lost soul like us. Bob hesitated, uncertainty clouding his features. It could be a trap. Or it could be help. "We can't stay here." I grabbed his arm, and despite his initial resistance, I pulled him toward the light. The closer we got, the more the crackling of the flames filled my ears, drowning out the previous tension. We stumbled into a small clearing, and the sight before us sent a shiver of both hope and horror racing through my veins. There, surrounded by an circle of rocks, was a campfire. But it was cold, the embers long extinguished, the ashes gray and lifeless. Scattered around it were remnants of belongings, torn pieces of clothing, an overturned backpack, and the unmistakable glint of a rusted knife. Someone was here, I breathed, stepping closer. They didn't just vanish. Bob edged forward, eyes wide with realization. What if they didn't leave willingly? The weight of his words hung between us, thickening the air. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, and that's when I noticed the marks, long, deep scratches on the bark of the trees, as if something had clawed its way through. A distant howling echoed in the air, and I felt the darkness pressing in again. My heart raced as I glanced back at the remnants of the campfire, a sickly dread pooling in my stomach. We should go back, I insisted, my voice trembling. This isn't right. But before I could take a step, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I spun around, and there it was again, the figure from before. It was closer now, its features still obscured but unmistakably watching, waiting. I felt Bob's grip tighten on my wrist as he pulled me back. Run! We bolted through the trees, branches clawing our skin as the howling intensified, a chorus of anguish that mirrored our own rising panic. The mountain, once a place of adventure, warped into something sinister, a trap set by forces we didn't yet understand. As we ran, I could feel the weight of the darkness behind us, a hungry shadow that threatened to swallow us whole. We had ventured too far, and now we were entangled in the mountain's cruel embrace, desperately searching for a way out. Story 3, Detention of the Damned. I remember the first day of school like it was a waking nightmare. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that clung to your skin and made you uneasy. As I walked through the cracked archway of Westwood High, the old building loomed over me, its brick facade weathered and worn. The peeling paint and the broken windows whispering secrets of decades gone by only added to the chill that gripped my heart. The school had a reputation, one that echoed through the hallways in hushed tones. Some said it was haunted, others talked of students who had vanished without a trace. I never paid much attention to the rumors until that day. As I made my way to the crowded cafeteria, I caught snippets of conversations about a girl named Lila. She had disappeared last year, her laughter replaced by an unsettling silence that hung in the air like a dark cloud. The way the other students talked about her, it felt like she was a ghost looming just out of sight. I pushed through the throngs of students, their faces blurred by a haze of anxiety and excitement. I found a table in the corner, hoping to make myself invisible. I was a nobody, really, and I preferred it that way. Just as I settled in, a tall boy with a mop of unruly hair plopped down across from me. His name was Tom, a self-proclaimed misfit who could read the room like a pro. "Did you hear about Lila?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to appear uninterested while my heart raced. "They say she was last seen near the woods behind the school. Some kids think she's still out there, roaming around. Others think she's, well, you know." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. The woods were a dark, suffocating blanket that surrounded the school, dense trees casting shadows that seemed to breathe. They were forbidden territory, a place where no student dared to tread after hours, but they tantalized the imagination of those who sought adventure. I had no intention of exploring them, especially not with stories of Lila echoing in my mind. The bell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I grabbed my backpack and headed to class, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a shroud. Each classroom felt like a prison cell, with eyes watching from every corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I brushed it aside, focusing instead on the mundane details of my schedule. Chemistry was uneventful, though the teacher's monotonous voice faded into the background. It wasn't until lunch that the dread returned, creeping up my spine like an icy finger. I had just taken a seat when I noticed a group of students huddled together, their faces pale and drawn. They whispered urgently, casting furtive glances toward the back of the cafeteria. "What's going on?" I asked a girl sitting next to me. She barely glanced my way. "They found something in the woods," she said, her voice trembling. "Something weird." My stomach twisted as I glanced back at the group. They were staring blankly, eyes wide, as if they had seen something they weren't meant to. A chilling thought crossed my mind. The woods were off limits because they hid secrets, terrible, sinister secrets. Later that day, I wandered the hallways, the normalcy of laughter and chatter feeling like a thin veneer over an unsettling reality. I overheard snippets of conversations about a creature lurking just beyond the tree line, but no one seemed to know what it was. My curiosity piqued despite the fear pooling in my gut. I had to know what they were talking about. After school, I decided to take a detour. Instead of heading straight home, I found myself at the edge of the woods, the shadows creeping closer as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The trees towered above me, their twisted branches forming a canopy that filtered the fading light. I hesitated, the whispers of warning echoing in my mind, but I was drawn in like a moth to a flame. Each step felt like a betrayal, the underbrush crackling beneath my feet. The further I ventured, the more the world outside faded away, replaced by a suffocating silence. The air grew thick and heavy, and suddenly I felt like I was being watched. An unsettling sensation prickled at the back of my neck, the kind of feeling that made you question your very existence. I pressed on, propelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, until I stumbled upon a small clearing. There, at the center, lay something half buried in the damp earth. My heart raced as I approached, curiosity battling against better judgment. I knelt down, my fingers trembling as they brushed away the dirt. What I uncovered sent a bolt of terror coursing through my veins. It was a fragment of clothing, tattered and stained, unmistakably belonging to a girl. My breath caught in my throat as the weight of the moment settled on my chest. The rumors about Lila flooded back, and I suddenly felt very small in a world that had become overwhelmingly large and terrifying. Just then, a rustle in the bushes sent me scrambling backward, heart pounding. I turned to flee, panic blinding my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The forest closed in around me, shadows dancing as I stumbled over roots and brambles, desperate to escape its suffocating grip. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the woods, gasping for air. The school loomed ahead, its familiar facade a stark contrast to the horrors hidden within the trees. I knew then that I would never look at Westwood High the same way again. Whatever had taken Lila was still out there, lurking beneath the surface, and I felt it watching me, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the shadows. The school loomed over me like a giant, a hulking mass of gray bricks and broken dreams, its windows staring down like hollow eyes. I hadn't thought much about the old building until the night of the incident, the night that had shattered the fragile piece of my life. Now, every time I stepped through those creaking doors, a shiver snaked down my spine. I had spent the better part of the previous week trying to convince myself that what happened in the chemistry lab was just a figment of my overactive imagination. But the whispers of my classmates haunted me. They were relentless, each one adding a layer of anxiety to my already fraying nerves. The atmosphere in the school had shifted. Students were murmuring about the accident that had claimed Mr. Collins, our beloved chemistry teacher. I replayed the moment in my head, the piercing scream, the chaos that followed. It was a Tuesday, the day after I had witnessed the aftermath. I sat in class, trying to focus on the lecture about chemical reactions, but my mind kept wandering to the dark corners of the school where shadows seemed to dance just out of sight. My eyes flitted to the clock, its ticking loud in the tense silence of the classroom. Each tick felt like a countdown to something unnameable. "Emily, can you answer the question?" The teacher's voice jolted me back to reality. The class turned to look at me, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention, I stammered, my cheeks flushing. The teacher nodded, irritation flashing across his face before he turned back to the whiteboard. I avoided eye contact with my classmates, who were whispering among themselves, no doubt discussing the rumors that surrounded Mr. Collins's death. After the bell rang, I hurried out, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the classroom. But as I made my way down the dimly lit hallways, a chill settled in the air. My heart raced as I passed the chemistry lab, the door ajar. The sight of it brought back memories I couldn't shake, the frantic shouts, the police, the blood. I rationalized that I needed to face my fears, to confront whatever lingered in that room. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open. The lab was still, too quiet, as if it had been waiting for someone to disturb its solemn calm. The tables were covered in a thin layer of dust, glasswork glinting dully in the overhead lights. I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under my weight. As I ventured deeper, I caught sight of Mr. Collins's desk. It stood untouched, papers scattered about, his notes still sprawled across the surface. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Just shadows playing tricks in the corners of my mind. I approached the desk, curiosity overriding my fear. I picked up a sheet of paper, the writing hurried and frantic. The last entry read, "Must be careful. Something is wrong with the compounds." My skin prickled as I turned the paper over, only to find a hastily drawn diagram of a chemical reaction, one that seemed dangerously unstable. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as a cold breeze brushed past me. I glanced toward the door, half expecting to see someone watching me. But I was alone. The silence closed in, pressing against my ears. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone, that something had been left behind in this room. Just as I was about to leave, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost melodic yet laced with despair. "Help me." My heart thundered in my chest, and I spun around, my eyes darting through the shadows. The voice felt close, intimate, as if it were right beside me. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice wavering. Silence enveloped the room, its weight too much to bear. I turned to leave when something caught my eye, a shadow flitting across the window. I hurried over, but the corridor outside was empty. Panic clawed at my throat. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a straight chair leg. I fell hard, the impact sending a shock through my body. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I saw it, a figure standing in the doorway. Tall and thin, cloaked in darkness. The figure didn't move, just watched, its presence suffocating. "Get out!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But as I took a step toward the door, it vanished, dissolving into the shadows as suddenly as it had appeared. Breathless, I stumbled outside, my heart racing with terror and confusion. I bolted down the hallway, the whispers echoing in my mind. "Help me!" I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted, as I escaped the lab. It was only when I reached the entrance that I felt the air clear, the oppressive weight lifting. But the moment I stepped outside, the school bell rang, a hauntingly cheery sound that mocked my fear. Students filed past, oblivious to the darkness that clung to the school, to the secrets hidden within its walls. I stumbled away, every instinct screaming at me to leave. As I made my way home, I couldn't help but glance back at the school. It stood there, resolute and foreboding, its secrets intact. I felt a chill run down my spine, a warning that this was just the beginning. I had unwittingly stepped into a nightmare that would not release its grip so easily. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty schoolyard as I made my way back to the building. The echoes of laughter had faded, leaving a heavy silence that weighed upon my chest. I had always loved the quiet moments after school, when the hallways were devoid of chatter and the classrooms felt more like abandoned chambers, but today was different. Today, a shiver crawled up my spine. I reached the front door, the chill creeping in, mingling with an unsettling unease. The school had an old, creaking charm that had always intrigued me, but now it felt like a mausoleum, housing memories I wished I could forget. I glanced at the cracked windows, then shook my head, trying to dispel the dark thoughts that clung to me like a shroud. The incident from the other day repeated in my mind. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face, pale and twisted in fear as she recounted her encounter. She had mentioned whispers in the bathroom, a sense of being watched, and shadows that moved unnaturally. I thought she might have been exaggerating, but now I wasn't so sure. There was a palpable tension in the air, a feeling of being unwelcome in the very space I had occupied for years. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the deserted halls. I walked past the gym, the sound of the basketball bouncing, muted and distorted, echoing from the locker room. I stopped for a moment, curiosity prickling at the edges of my fear. I pushed open the door, expecting to find someone inside, but only the shadows greeted me. The gym smelled of old sweat and polished wood, an untouched relic of the past. I leaned against the doorframe, peering into the dimness. "Hello?" I called, but my voice sounded small in the vastness. The silence stretched, seeming to swallow my words. There was no reply. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and I stepped back, heart racing. I couldn't linger here. I turned and walked out, the soles of my shoes slapping against the polished floor as I made my way towards the science wing. Perhaps some familiarity would soothe my nerves. I craved the comfort of textbooks and lab equipment, anything to distract me from the sense of dread that hung like a fog. As I entered the science lab, the smell of formaldehyde hit me. It always had a way of grounding me, of reminding me that learning could be a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. I settled into my usual spot, surrounded by test tubes and beakers. I couldn't shake the notion that something was off, though. The room felt stifling, as if the walls were closing in. The clock ticked loudly, and I found myself staring at it, watching each second tick away. I was alone now, and the stillness pressed down on me like a weight. Just as I was about to leave, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from the storage closet in the back. I stared, frozen, the sound sending icy tendrils of fear through me. The whispers sounded like a conversation, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart pounded, and I felt a compulsion to investigate, to confront whatever lay within that closet. I took a hesitant step toward the door, hands trembling. With each step, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if they were beckoning me. The doorknob felt cold to the touch, and I hesitated, a wave of nausea washing over me. But curiosity won out. I turned it and pulled the door open. Nothing. The small room was dark and cluttered with old equipment covered in dust. I could see the outlines of glass containers, and cobwebs hung from the corners like ghostly tendrils. I squinted into the darkness, the whispers abruptly halting as if I'd interrupted something sacred. "Hello?" I called out again, but my voice echoed back at me, mocking in its emptiness. I stepped inside, heart hammering, and scanned the shelves. Just as I turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting behind one of the shelves. "Who's there?" I demanded, but only silence answered. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, caught between fear and the absurd desire to uncover whatever was hidden in this forsaken corner of the school. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I spun around, adrenaline surging through me. I gripped the doorknob, twisting it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose as I rattled the door, urgency fueling my actions, but it remained sealed as if it were a tomb. Let me out! I shouted, my voice rising in terror. Then, a low, guttural groan echoed from the shadows, sending a jolt through my veins. I turned back to the darkness, my breath hitching as I squinted into the murky depths. The silhouette emerged, not human, but something else entirely, a figure, elongated and distorted, with hollow eyes that glimmered like dying embers. I stumbled back, heart racing, and I felt the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. It moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, and I finally broke free from my paralysis, slamming against the door with a frantic urgency. The shadow reached out, fingers too long, too thin, and I screamed as I finally yanked the doorknob again. This time it gave way, and I bolted through the opening, stumbling into the hallway. I ran, not looking back, as the relentless echoes of the whispers followed me, wrapping around me like a shroud. Outside, the daylight felt blinding, but the warmth did little to calm the chill that coursed through me. I needed to escape, to get away from this place that had transformed from sanctuary to nightmare. I didn't stop until I reached the car, my heart racing madly, the whispers fading into the distance but never truly leaving me. I knew I had to come back, to confront whatever haunted those halls, but in that moment, all I could think of was escape. The school had become a cage, and I was determined to break free, even if I didn't know the cost of what lay ahead. The school loomed before me like a dark sentinel, its brick facade dull and uninviting under the overcast sky. A thick fog clung to the ground, coiling around my ankles, making each step toward the entrance feel deliberate, as if the earth itself urged me to turn back. I had spent the last few days wrestling with the memories of my last encounter in the old science lab, and yet here I was, drawn back to the very place that had begun to unravel the threads of my sanity. The hallway was empty, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the stained tiles. I glanced at the trophy case, the glass cracked and dust-coated, displaying the remnants of victories long past. The accolades felt almost mocking now, reminders of a time when this school held promise instead of dread. I steeled myself, reminding my reflection in the glass that I had to uncover the truth. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. My feet led me to the science lab, the door hanging ajar as though it had been waiting for me. The chill in the air prickled at my skin, and I hesitated before stepping through. The room was dim, sunlight filtered unevenly through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. I could almost hear the whispers from that night as I stepped inside, my heart quickening. I scanned the lab. Nothing appeared out of place, yet a palpable tension hung in the air, thickening the atmosphere with a sense of foreboding. The old equipment, disused and forgotten, seemed alive, watching me with silent eyes. With a deep breath, I approached the specimen cabinet, its glass shelves lined with jars of murky liquids and unidentifiable objects floating within. I recalled the stories of the teacher rumored to have experimented with dark forces, a figure often spoken of in hushed tones. Some claimed he had never left. I opened a cabinet, gingerly pulling it wide. Inside, an unremarkable glass jar sat in the corner. A simple label reading Sample 14 seemed to beckon me closer. I picked it up, examining its contents. The liquid swirled unnaturally, a dark undertone that seemed to pulse within the glass as if it housed a life of its own. It gave off an unsettling energy, and I quickly set it back down, unease crawling up my spine. Just then, a noise broke through the stillness, a low creak. I spun toward the sound, my heart racing. The door had swung closed, and I rushed to it, my hands trembling as I tried to pull it open. It didn't budge. Panic surged within me. I pulled harder, adrenaline fueling my strength, but the door remained rigidly shut. My breath quickened, echoing in the silence around me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering. No response came, only the distant sound of my own heartbeat and the ominous creaks of the building settling. I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at my throat. "Let me out." A whisper floated through the air, chilling my blood. It was my name, barely audible but clear enough to send a shiver coursing through me. Emily. I froze, recognizing the voice. It belonged to Sarah, my friend who had recently vanished without a trace. The disbelief hit me like a physical force. Was I imagining things? I pressed my ear against the cold wood, hoping to hear her again. Sarah? Where are you? Silence fell once again, heavy and suffocating. I felt the walls closing in around me, darkness pooling in the corners of the lab. I backed away from the door, scanning the room for another way out. My gaze landed on the window, the only other exit, but it was barred tightly. Regret washed over me as I recalled Sarah's warnings about the school's hidden corners, tales of what had happened to those who got too close to the truth. I turned back to the cabinet, desperation clawing at me as I rummaged through the jars, searching for anything that could aid my escape. My fingers grazed the edge of a large, dusty book crammed between the shelves. It slid out with ease, the spine cracking as I opened it. The pages were filled with notes and diagrams, scrawled in an erratic hand. My heart raced as I flipped through, absorbing the grim depictions of rituals, experiments, and something darker lurking beneath the surface. As I read, I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. It was like peering into a void I had no business troubling. I glanced back at the door, instinctively feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around me like a tempest. They were no longer just Sarah's voice. They morphed into a cacophony of tortured cries, begging for release, for recognition. I slammed the book shut, anchoring myself to the present, shaking my head as if to dispel the nightmare creeping into my reality. In that moment, a memory surged forth, a fleeting image of Sarah, standing pale and hollow, pleading for help. I had to find her. I had to escape this nightmare. I lunged at the window, grabbing the rusted bars with all my strength and yanking. They rattled but held firm. Suddenly, a soft tapping broke through the noise, a rhythmic beat that echoed in time with my frantic heart. I froze, eyes darting around the room as the tapping grew louder. It was coming from the corner of the lab, where shadows pulled thickest. As my heart raced, I approached the source, breath hitching in my throat. The shadows shifted, coiling like smoke, and I felt an overwhelming urge to retreat. Yet, I couldn't. I had to know. The tapping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence, as if the room held its breath. I reached out, my fingers stretching toward the darkness, drawn by an inexplicable force. And then, the shadow pulled back, revealing a small, wooden box, ancient and worn, almost alive in the dim light. With a heavy hand, I picked it up, feeling its weight settle into my palms. Hope and dread warred within me. This box could hold the answers I desperately sought or plunge me deeper into the abyss. As I turned it over, I felt a chill breeze sweep through the lab, extinguishing the last vestiges of warmth. The door behind me rattled violently, shaking with an urgency that screamed for me to run. In that instant, I made my decision. I had to open the box, had to confront whatever truth lay inside. With shaking hands, I unclasped the latch, and as I lifted the lid, the whispers crescendoed into a haunting symphony of despair. And in that moment, I understood. The school was alive, and it was waiting. The morning sun filtered weakly through the dusty classroom windows, casting a feeble glow over the scattered papers and forgotten textbooks. I sat at my desk, tapping a pencil against the wood, the sound echoing in the unsettling quiet. It had been 3 days since we discovered the old janitor's diary in the basement. 3 days since the whispers had started, shadows flitting at the edge of my vision and flickers of movement lingering just outside the corners of my eyes. My friends, Mark and Lily, had dismissed my concerns, claiming it was just the stress of midterms getting to me. But I knew better. Something had awakened in our school, something dark. As the clock ticked ominously towards noon, the silence became oppressive. Miss Thompson, our history teacher, was droning on about the Industrial Revolution, her voice a monotone that seemed to melt with the heavy stillness of the room. I forced myself to pay attention, but my mind wandered back to that diary, its brittle pages filled with the ramblings of a man who had seen too much. The last entry sent a shiver down my spine each time I recalled it. The darkness has claimed its due. Beware the forgotten. A sudden creak from the back of the room jolted me from my thoughts. I turned, scanning the faces of my classmates, their eyes glazed over with boredom. I was the only one who had noticed the noise. A chill wrapped around my spine, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. I tried to focus once again on Miss Thompson, but the classroom felt too confined, too alive with a tension I couldn't explain. When the bell finally rang, releasing us into the chaotic hallway, I felt a rush of relief mixed with apprehension. I caught up with Mark and Lily, who were engaged in a heated exchange about what they planned to wear to the upcoming dance. I wanted to tell them about the feeling of being watched, how I felt the air grow thick whenever I walked past the old gymnasium, but the words got stuck in my throat. "Are you even listening?" Lily snapped, stopping mid-sentence to glare at me. "Sorry, I can't stop thinking about that diary," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Again with that?" "It's just a bunch of old nonsense," Mark said, rolling his eyes. "You need to drop it." I kept my gaze on the floor as we walked, the dull sound of sneakers on linoleum a consolation against the suffocating silence. I tried to shake off their dismissive attitudes, but unease clung to me like a second skin. It escalated as we approached the main staircase, the very same staircase mentioned in the diary. A shiver ran through me, and I hesitated before descending. "Come on, slowpoke," Lily called, already 2 steps ahead. With each step down, I felt a twinge of dread. The air thickened around me, and shadows seemed to stretch and twist as if alive. I glanced back, certain I saw something dart behind a row of lockers, but when I turned to look, the corridor was empty. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing. "See what?" Mark replied, his voice edged with irritation. "Nothing." I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. "Never mind." Despite their casual demeanor, I noticed that both Mark and Lily quickened their pace toward the lunchroom. I had to catch my breath before I continued, a primal instinct urging me to turn back. But as I approached the entrance, I heard laughter, sharp, cruel, and echoing like a taunt. It sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" Lily replied, confusion etched on her face. "Never mind," I murmured, uncertainty settling in my chest as dread morphed into something more sinister. I searched the room as we entered. The usual sea of students blended into a blur, laughter and chatter masking my growing anxiety. I spotted an empty table in the corner, the perfect haven away from the chaos. I headed there, my friends trailing behind, their conversation slipping into the background like white noise. But the laughter continued, drawing my attention to the far side of the room. A group of boys stood huddled together, exchanging sly glances and chuckles. I squinted, trying to catch what was so amusing. And then I saw him. A figure slouched at the edge of their circle, his face obscured by a hood. He was whispering something, words slipping through the crack between his lips like venom. I felt my heart race as terror coiled in my gut. This was the boy from the old gym, the one the diary mentioned, the one who had vanished. My breath hitched, and I turned to Mark and Lily. "Do you see him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "See who?" Mark glanced in the direction I was pointing, a frown creasing his forehead. "There's no one there." The figure seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving no trace behind. Panic clawed at me. I was losing my grip on reality, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was the only one who could see the horrors that lurked in the corners of this cursed school. "I'm going to the restroom," I said hurriedly, needing space to breathe and think. I slipped away from the table, the noise of the lunchroom fading as I navigated the dimly lit corridor leading toward the restroom. As I pushed through the door, the smell of stale air hit me, and I hesitated. But I needed time to gather my thoughts. I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I leaned against the sink, splashing cold water on my face, hoping it would clear my mind. But as I raised my head, I froze. In the mirror, the reflection was not mine. There was a boy standing behind me, his dark eyes boring into my soul, a shadow of something lost and broken. I turned abruptly, but the bathroom was empty. My heart thundered in my chest, and I stumbled backward, falling against the sinks, the cold porcelain grounding me. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just your imagination." But as I looked back into the mirror, the words "Beware the Forgotten" echoed in my mind, warning me of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of our ordinary school. The reflection flickered, and I was certain of something sinister creeping closer. It was time to confront the truth, whatever it may be. I could no longer hide from the shadows. Story 4, Midnight Calls from the Unseen. The autumn air held a crispness that felt almost electric, swirling with the anticipation of the long, dark nights to come. I had always enjoyed babysitting, the way the quiet hum of a home invited a certain kind of intimacy. But that night, the air felt different, heavy, charged. It was October, and with Halloween around the corner, the world pulsed with a restless energy that seeped into every crevice of my mind. Mrs. Thompson had called me only a few hours before I was due to start. She sounded frantic, her voice laced with urgency. "I know it's last minute, but could you please come by at 7? I have a meeting that I just can't miss." I assured her it was no trouble at all. In truth, I relished the thought of spending the evening with the Thompson kids. They were both sweet and well-behaved, a welcome distraction from my own home life, which had become increasingly fraught with tension. The Thompson house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a sprawling two-story structure that seemed to loom larger in the twilight. As I approached, a shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't quite tell if it was the chill in the air or something more. The porch light flickered as I climbed the steps, and I paused to listen to the rustling leaves, feeling a sense of unease creep in. The front door swung open, and Mrs. Thompson stood there, her hair slightly disheveled, eyes wide with a desperation I had never seen before. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice a mix of relief and apprehension. "The kids are upstairs. They'll be thrilled to see you." I nodded, forcing a smile, but her anxious energy seeped into me, setting me on edge. As she explained the details of the evening, I caught glimpses of the home, family photos on the walls, a warm but chaotic living space filled with toys and scattered shoes. It felt familiar, safe, yet something gnawed at me from the shadows. After Mrs. Thompson left, I took a deep breath and headed upstairs. The sounds of TV laughter echoed from the living room, but the kids weren't there. Instead, I found them in their bedroom, Amelia and Ben, sprawled on the floor surrounded by a collection of brightly colored toys. "Emily," they shouted in unison, their faces lighting up as I entered. I felt a surge of warmth, the weight of tension lifting just a little. "We were hoping you would come." I settled onto the floor beside them. "What are you two up to?" "We're playing a game," Ben said, his enthusiasm infectious. "It's a new one, Ghosts and Goblins." Amelia chimed in, "It's Halloween soon. We have to get ready." The excitement in their voices drowned out my lingering unease. We played for a while, the sounds of their laughter filling the room. But as darkness fell outside, the atmosphere shifted. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 9, and I had just settled them into bed after a marathon of stories. The house felt larger now, its corners darker, the silence more pronounced. I flipped on the hallway light and made my way down to the living room, where I could see the streetlight casting long shadows through the windows. As I arranged the toys on the coffee table, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I turned abruptly, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows. But the house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustle of leaves outside. The moment passed, and I chastised myself for being jumpy. I settled back onto the couch, the TV flickering softly. That's when I heard a faint noise from upstairs, a muffled whisper that seemed to drift down the staircase. My heartbeat quickened as I strained to listen, but soon the sound faded, replaced by the usual creaks of the house settling around me. I shook my head. It was probably just the wind. After all, houses this old had their quirks. I picked up my phone to check the time again. It was nearly 10. Mrs. Thompson should be home soon. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a soft call from upstairs. Emily. My heart skipped. Who was calling my name? The kids were asleep, or at least they should have been. I rushed to the base of the stairs, glancing up into the dimly lit hallway. Amelia? Ben? I called out, my voice more steady than I felt. Silence answered, thick and suffocating. I hesitated, a chill creeping up my spine. Seconds stretched into an eternity as I stood frozen. Just as I was about to retreat, a shadow flitted across the hall, momentarily breaking the stillness. My breath caught in my throat, and I stepped forward instinctively, drawn to the movement. As I climbed the stairs, the air grew heavier, more oppressive. I reached the top and peered into the children's room. The door was ajar, but inside, the room lay dark and quiet. I pushed the door open, my pulse quickening with each creak of the hinges. The beds were unmade, their little bodies nowhere to be seen. Amelia? Ben? I called out, panic rising. What was happening? I turned to check the bathroom, the closet, anywhere they could have hidden. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. And then I heard it again, that soft whisper, just behind me. Emily. I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. I had expected my first night babysitting for the Kellers to be a routine experience, watching over two kids while their parents enjoyed a night out. I envisioned it as nothing more than a few hours filled with cartoons, a little homework supervision, and then an easy bedtime. Instead, the atmosphere in their home felt charged, almost heavy with something unnameable. When Mrs. Keller had handed me the door key, her look was more than just maternal concern. There was an urgency to her voice that refused to fade. If anything feels off, call me immediately, she had insisted, her eyes scanning the entryway as if something might leap out at any moment. I laughed it off at the time, thinking she was overprotective, but as the evening wore on, her words echoed in my mind with growing clarity. The Keller house was a well-kept, two-story structure at the edge of town. The kids went to bed early, and as I settled on the living room couch, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was just the two of us now, me and the silence that seemed to thicken the air around me after the kids had drifted off to sleep. They had been delightful. Ellie, the 8-year-old, had a vibrant energy that drew me in, and Max, her timid 5-year-old brother, was sweet but prone to sudden bursts of fear. I tucked them into bed, the soft whispers of their sleepy voices still ringing in my ears. Once the house settled into that eerie hush, I turned on the television, hoping to distract myself with mindless reruns. The bright screen flickered, casting ghostly shadows on the walls, and I found myself glancing around, half expecting to see something lurking in the corners. The clock ticked steadily, each ticking second amplifying my unease. After a while, I began to hear it. A soft sound, like a whisper drifting through the house. I paused the show, straining my ears. No, it wasn't just my imagination. I could hear it more distinctly now, a low, almost pleading murmur. It floated down the hallway, filtering through the wooden floors. My heart raced as I stood up, the couch creaking beneath my weight. Surely, it was just the wind, or perhaps the owls settling. Old homes did that, I reminded myself. But as I walked toward the sound, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The whispers became clearer, echoing in a way that felt wrong, as if they weren't meant for me. I stepped forward cautiously, my bare feet cold against the hardwood. "Allie?" "Max." I called, my voice trembling slightly, but I received no response. I reached the door of Ellie and Max's room, where the whispers seemed to coalesce into a dark lullaby. I pushed the door open just a crack, the hinges creaking ominously. The light from the hallway fell onto their beds, revealing their sleeping forms tucked beneath colorful blankets. Relief washed over me momentarily, but the whispers persisted, slipping through the space where the door met the frame. I slipped into the hallway, drawn by the sound, against every instinct pleading for me to turn back. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Each step I took felt like a descent into something darker, a place I wouldn't easily escape from. The whispers led me to the closed door of the cellar, a wooden door painted the same color as the walls, but looking faded and forlorn. Waves of apprehension washed over me as I gripped the handle, my pulse quickening. The murmurs had transformed, now resembling voices, hushed and urgent, yet I couldn't decipher their words. I hesitated, the rational part of my mind screaming at me to close the door and return to the comfort of the couch. But curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me closer to the threshold. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the abyss of the cellar. The faint scent of mildew wafted up, mingling with the musty odor of forgotten things. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness where shadows clung to the corners like uninvited guests. I descended slowly, each step accompanied by the sound of creaking wood beneath my weight. My heart beat erratically in my chest as I reached the bottom, the whispers loud now and insistent in thrumming through the silence. The cellar was cluttered with boxes, old furniture draped in dust, and shadows that seemed to move just beyond my sight. My flashlight illuminated sparse details, cracked walls, forgotten toys, and a large, old mirror leaning against the far wall. The whispers intensified as I approached it, swirling around me in a cacophony of hushed secrets. I shone the light at the mirror, half expecting to see something lurking behind me, but it reflected only my own wide-eyed expression. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by a low thud that echoed through the cellar, causing me to jump. I swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing, no sign of movement, no voices calling out. Just me, alone with my racing heart in a darkness that felt alive. Then, a chill crawled up my spine. I could have sworn I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow darting back into the gloom. I shook my head, convincing myself it was a trick of the light, and took a step back. I turned on my heel, ready to bolt back up the stairs when I felt it, a soft, icy breath against my neck. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight illuminating nothing but the stagnant air, yet the sensation lingered, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. Panic surged through me, and I raced up the stairs, my feet pounding against each step. I flung the door shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for breath. The whispers had faded again, replaced by an oppressive silence that echoed through the hallway. I slumped against the door, trembling. Had I really just imagined it? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, the weight of the owls pressing down on me. Just then, the sound of small footsteps echoed from upstairs, followed by a soft, innocent voice. It was Max. "Are you okay?" he asked, his wide eyes shimmering in the dim light. I forced a smile, though my heart still raced. "Yeah, buddy. Just checking on you. Go back to sleep." But as I turned to head back to the living room, I could still feel the echoes of those whispers clinging to me, a reminder that not everything in the Keller house was as it seemed. The night had settled in thick and heavy, pressing against the windows like a heavy blanket. The pale light of the moon seeped through the curtains, casting eerie shadows that flickered with every breeze. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that clung to me since I'd arrived at the Holloway home. The toddler, Timmy, had been asleep for nearly 3 hours, his soft snores barely audible over the creaking of the old house. I had settled in on the couch, a faded, floral-patterned monstrosity that looked like it had seen better days. I buried my face in my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, trying to distract myself from the weight of silence. That's when I heard a soft thump from upstairs. I sat up, heart racing, and listened intently. The sound didn't come again, but the quiet was maddening. I reminded myself that old houses creaked and groaned, especially at night, but a chill slithered down my spine. I stood up, stretching my limbs, trying to shake off the discomfort. Timmy was secure in his crib, and I had checked on him just an hour ago. I assured myself that if anything was amiss, I would hear him cry out. Still, I felt a pull toward the staircase, an urge to investigate. I crept toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The hallway was dim, lit only by the flickering light of a dying bulb overhead. Every step I took seemed to echo in the stillness, and I cursed myself for being so bold. As I reached the top, I could see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I blinked, focusing my eyes, but nothing shifted. The source of the noise was the door at the end of the hall, a simple wooden door that had been closed since I arrived. I hesitated, my breath coming in shallow bursts. What if it was nothing? What if it was Timmy? But if something was in there, if something was wrong? Against my better judgment, I approached the door. I placed my hand against the wood, feeling the cool surface against my palm. I took a deep breath, then turned the knob slowly, the door creaking open with an unsettling groan. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. I flicked on the light, squinting against the glare. The room appeared to be a small office, cluttered with stacks of papers, old toys, and a few dusty boxes. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the air was thick with an odd tension. I had expected the source of the noise to be something tangible, but it was as if the room had a heartbeat of its own. I stepped further inside, my pulse racing. That's when I heard it again, a soft whisper that seemed to flutter around me like a trapped bird. I froze. It wasn't the wind, it was a voice, faint and indistinct. I strained to hear, but it slipped away, leaving me with only the bitter taste of dread. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling. Silence responded, heavy and oppressive. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a stuffed bear peeking out from behind a box. It was familiar. Timmy had a bear that looked just like it. I knelt down and pulled it out. The fabric was worn, the stitching frayed, but it was clean, as if it had been recently played with. Returning to the door, I glanced back over my shoulder. Something flickered in the corner of my vision, a shadow darting just out of reach. I scoffed at myself. It was just my imagination. I forced myself to step away from the room and back toward the staircase, but the unsettling feeling remained pressed against my chest. As I descended the stairs, I glanced toward the living room, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the room, half hidden in the shadows. My heart stopped. Who's there? My voice was barely a whisper. The figure didn't move, just stood there, a silhouette against the dim light. Panic surged through me, and I took a hesitant step back. Timmy? I called, but my words sounded hollow. The figure turned its head slightly, and I caught a glint of something in its eyes, cold and unblinking. I turned and bolted, racing up the stairs and back to Timmy's room. For a fleeting moment, I thought I heard a soft laugh echo behind me, high-pitched and sinister, but I pushed the thought away. I had to get to Timmy. I flung open the door to his room and rushed inside, my heart hammering in my chest. To my relief, Timmy remained asleep in his crib, blissfully unaware of the terror that gripped me. I leaned over the crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of his tiny body. Through the window, I could see the shadows moving outside, trees swaying in the wind, or perhaps something else. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down. I was just being paranoid. I had to keep my cool. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lingering just beyond the threshold of my perception. I pulled out my phone and texted Rachel, hoping for some reassurance. "Everything okay?" she replied almost immediately. "Just heard a noise." I checked on Timmy. "He's fine," I typed back, though I wasn't convinced of my own words. The reply came too quickly. "You know you can call me if you need to, right?" I hesitated, staring at the screen. I wanted to say yes, to reach out and ask her to come back. But I couldn't admit to weakness, not now. I set my phone down and paced the room, glancing once more at Timmy. The shadows outside seemed to elongate, creeping closer to the house. Something felt terribly wrong. A sudden crash echoed from downstairs, shattering the fragile silence that had settled over the house. I froze, adrenaline flooding my veins. My instinct screamed for me to stay put, to protect Timmy, but curiosity and dread pulled me toward the door. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, and stepped toward the hallway, ready to face whatever awaited me in the darkness. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard it again, a soft laugh, unmistakably close, sending chills racing down my spine. Something was in the house with us, and I had to find out what it was. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second amplifying the silence that enveloped the house. I sat on the edge of the couch, cradling the phone in my hand, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the occasional creak of the old wooden house settling. I glanced at my watch, realizing it was already past 10. The kids had been asleep for hours, their soft breaths a comforting reminder that my job was a simple one until tonight. I had never babysat for the Harris family before, but Jenna had assured me it would be easy. The boys, Sam and Leo, were well behaved and always went to bed without protest. That was true enough. They had been quiet under the gentle glow of their night lights, their faces peaceful as they drifted off. But now, my thoughts were clouded by the lingering unease that had latched onto me since the moment I entered the house. I had chalked it up to nerves at first, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of a new environment, but something about this house felt off. The walls seemed to pulse with secrets, dark and hidden. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through messages from Jenna, who was likely enjoying her night out. I had promised to text her when the boys were asleep, and I had, but I felt the need to reach out again. Just a quick message, "Everything is fine. The boys are asleep." I muted the phone and set it down, the feeling of being watched creeping across my skin. I glanced toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The boys' room was at the end of the hall, but something about the shadows pooling at the top of the stairs sent a shiver down my spine. I could have sworn I had heard a faint giggle earlier, but I had brushed it off as the remnants of the boys' bedtime stories lingering in the air. I stood up, my feet carrying me toward the kitchen. The ice maker in the refrigerator clanked, and I grabbed a glass of water, forcing myself to focus on something mundane. I poured the water into a glass, the cool liquid comforting against my lips. As I drank, I heard it again, a soft giggle, a whisper of sound that should not have been there. I froze, the glass halfway to the table. My heart thundered in my chest, and I turned toward the source of the sound. "Sam? Leo?" I called out, my voice wavering. Silence answered, thick and heavy. I set the glass down and walked cautiously toward the staircase. The shadows danced in the dim light, and I peered up the stairs, half expecting to see two small faces peeking down at me. Nothing. Just the eerie quiet of the house. Gathering my courage, I ascended the steps, my footsteps muffled against the carpet. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from beneath the door to the boys' room. I could hear the faint sound of breathing behind the door, but it was so soft it barely registered. I placed my hand against the cool wood, hesitating. What if they were awake? Jenna had said they were good about staying in bed, but what if they needed me? I knocked gently. "Hey, boys, are you okay?" There was a moment of silence, and I was about to turn away when Leo's voice called out, "We're fine." It was almost too cheerful, a note of mischief lacing his tone. Relief washed over me, and I turned to head back down the stairs. That's when I heard it again, louder this time. A giggle, followed by what felt like a faint whisper. The sound was unnerving, like it was coming from the walls themselves. I shivered despite the warmth of the house. I returned to the living room and picked up the remote, flipping through channels absent-mindedly as I tried to distract myself. But the laughter echoed in my mind, gnawing at my nerves. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a text from Jenna. "How's it going? Everything good?" I typed back quickly, "Yeah, everything's fine. The boys are asleep." But before I hit send, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The hallway light flickered. I glanced up, my breath hitching in my throat. The light blinked again, casting erratic shadows along the wall. It was only supposed to be a light bulb acting up, but as I stared at it, I felt a presence looming just outside my vision. I sent the message to Jenna and stood up slowly, making my way back to the staircase. The hallway was darker now, the light overhead flickering in and out like a heartbeat. I stopped at the top of the steps and called out, "Boys, if you're playing games, it's time to go to sleep." The silence that followed felt thick, almost suffocating. I stepped lightly toward the boys' room, my heart racing. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the glow of their nightlight spilling out into the hallway. I pushed the door open, peeking inside. The beds were empty. My stomach dropped as I scanned the room, panic surging through me. I turned back quickly, just in time to see the hallway light flicker once more and then extinguish completely. Darkness enveloped me, an inky silence wrapping around my throat. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears as fear surged through my veins. The house was still too quiet. I turned to flee back down the stairs, but a whisper echoed from behind me, chilling my blood. "Come play with us." I spun around, my heart racing against the terror coursing through me. The boys stood at the end of the hall, shadows playing tricks with their figures. Their faces were obscured, but I could see their wide eyes glimmering in the faint light of the night light. It took me a moment to realize they weren't in pajamas anymore. They wore strange, old-fashioned clothes, frayed at the edges, as if they had stepped out of another time. "Come on." Leo beckoned, his voice pulling at something deep inside me, a call I felt compelled to answer. But something wasn't right, and I knew it. The air crackled with a tension I couldn't quite place, a foreboding that settled over me like a thick fog. I took a step back, reaching for my phone, but it was gone, slipped from my grasp in the chaos of the moment. "Come play with us," Sam echoed, and I stumbled back, my instinct screaming for me to run. This wasn't just babysitting anymore. This was something much darker, something that had been waiting for me in the shadows. The clock ticked incessantly, punctuating the stillness of the house like a metronome guiding me into the depths of my anxiety. I had been staring at the old grandfather clock in the living room for what felt like hours, its pendulum swinging back and forth with a hypnotic rhythm that only drove my nerves deeper into the ground. A shrill ring from my phone had pulled me from my thoughts, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence that enveloped the house. The children were asleep upstairs, their soft breaths drifting down the hallway. I had checked on them not long before, reassured by the gentle rise and fall of their small chests under the pale glow of the night light. The parents had left strict instructions: no TV, no loud noises. Just keep an eye on the kids, and everything would be fine. Yet a gnawing feeling at the back of my mind told me that fine was an illusion. The owls creaked and sighed, settling into the chilly night. An occasional gust of wind rattled the windows, and I found myself jumping at the slightest sound. I remembered the stories the parents had told me about the owls, a century-old structure that had seen more than its fair share of history. There were whispers of strange happenings in the neighborhood, but I brushed them off, attributing them to local lore meant to keep children in line. Still, every shadow loomed larger in the dim light. Every flicker of the candle I had lit felt like the breath of something unseen. I had tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media while the light danced on the walls. But then I saw it, a notification from a local news app that read, "Series of home invasions in suburban neighborhood." My stomach dropped. I had heard about those incidents, the nerve-shattering tales of families terrorized in their homes. This was the last thing I wanted to read while sitting alone in a house that felt far too large for my lone figure. I pushed the phone away, trying to refocus on the children, reminding myself that they were my priority. I paced the living room, peering out of the front window. The street was deserted, lit by the flickering lamps that stood like sentinels along the pavement. I could see the neighborhood stretching out before me, seemingly safe, but that knowledge was fleeting. I had locked the doors, but insecurity seeped into my bones, making me feel as though someone was watching. The sudden creak of the stairs startled me, and I spun around, heart racing. Had I imagined it? I shook my head, taking a deep breath to regain my composure. Maybe it was the old house settling again. Or the wind. I turned back toward the window, but my heart sank as I saw a shadow flitting past the edge of my vision. I rushed to the window, squinting into the darkness. Nothing but the faint silhouettes of trees swaying under the moonlight met my gaze. I told myself I was being foolish, that my imagination was playing tricks on me. I returned to my seat, tapping my fingers against my knees, trying to anchor myself in reality. Minutes crawled by, but the oppressive silence returned, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I wished for a distraction, anything to break the monotony of the night. I picked up my phone again, but the battery was almost dead. I cursed under my breath, forcing myself to stand and search for a charger. On my way to the kitchen, I paused outside the children's room, the door slightly ajar. I peeked in, relieved to see them still sleeping soundly. Their soft, innocent faces calmed my nerves momentarily, but a dread still clung to my chest. In the kitchen, I rummaged through drawers until I found the charger. As I plugged in my phone, the screen flickered to life, and I briefly scanned the news. The latest article detailed not just home invasions but a recent escalation in violence. The unseen figure that had haunted my thoughts now felt more tangible. I pushed the phone away and leaned against the counter, staring into the shadows that seemed to stretch ominously across the room. Then a sound broke through the silence, a faint thud from upstairs. My breath caught in my throat. It was soft, almost muffled, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I stood frozen, straining to hear more. It could have been an errant noise, just the owls settling again, but doubt crept in like a slow poison. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, my hands trembling as I switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, but as I directed it toward the staircase, shadows danced unnaturally along the walls. The thud came again, this time louder, more deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone was upstairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. There was no response, only a chilling silence that seemed to mock me. I felt foolish, exposed, standing alone in a house that should be filled with safety. I wanted to run, to grab the kids and bolt for the front door, but I couldn't abandon them. They depended on me. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I stepped toward the staircase. Each creak of the wood beneath my feet seemed to echo through the house, a percussion to the rising dread that filled my heart. The flashlight flickered as I climbed, illuminating the walls adorned with old photographs that seemed to watch me as I ascended. I reached the top, my breath shallow. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit. My pulse raced as I made my way toward their door, heart pounding in my ears. I hesitated, the flashlight beam flickering as I knocked gently. "Are you guys okay?" I whispered. Silence lingered for a moment too long. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, the room was dark, the children nestled peacefully under their blankets. Relief washed over me, but as I turned to leave, I heard it again. A deliberate creak, this time right behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, the flashlight beam piercing through the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the lingering chill of fear. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Story 5, Echoes of the Forgotten Grove. I had always known that the forest behind my childhood home was different. Others would speak of its beauty in spring, how the cherry blossoms would scatter like confetti when the wind blew through the branches. They would take their children there for picnics, their laughter echoing among the trees, but I felt a heaviness in the air that made me uneasy. I wasn't sure why I first felt it. Maybe it was the day I found the old, rusted key half buried in the dirt, or perhaps it was the stories whispered among the neighborhood kids about the woman in white who roamed the woods at night. As I grew older, I began to avoid the place entirely. But then, life had a way of dragging me back. I had returned to my hometown after my father's death, the house now empty and echoing with memories. The forest loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the fading sun, and despite my better judgment, I found myself drawn toward it, as if some invisible thread were pulling me into its depths. It was late afternoon when I crossed the threshold of the tree line, the once familiar path now overgrown and tangled. The air thickened, heavy with damp earth and decaying leaves, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy in patches, casting ghostly shadows that danced eerily around me. Each step deeper into the forest made my heart race, the uneasy feeling swelling in my chest. I couldn't quite shake the sensation of being watched, though I tried to convince myself it was merely a product of my imagination. As I walked, the memories of my childhood flooded back, my friends daring each other to venture deeper, the hushed conversations about the woman in white. The stories were always vague, whispered in tones that suggested something sinister. Nobody had ever claimed to see her, yet the fear lingered, a collective anxiety that bound us together as children. I had scoffed at the time, but standing among the trees, I felt the weight of those stories settle around me like a shroud. I paused at a clearing, where a twisted old oak stood sentinel, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. It was here I had once played pretend, weaving tales of fantastical creatures and hidden treasures. Now it felt different. The air seemed to shimmer with a palpable tension, and the wind whispered secrets I could not discern. As I approached the tree, its bark rough beneath my fingertips, I noticed something strange, a small, intricately carved figure wedged in a nook, half hidden by moss and ivy. It was a representation of a woman, her face serene yet haunting, her eyes seeming to follow me as I circled the tree. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and I couldn't help but wonder if someone had left it there intentionally. I reached out to touch it, and a chill coursed through me, as if the figure had absorbed the forest's darkness. In that moment, the air grew still, and the forest fell silent. The chirping of birds ceased, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Perhaps it was just a trick of the mind, but I could have sworn I felt an unmistakable presence lurking in the shadows. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, when I saw her, a fleeting glimpse of a white figure darting between the trees. My heart raced. I blinked, and the vision vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. Ignoring the warning bells ringing in my head, I pressed on, curiosity pushing me deeper. The path twisted and turned, branches clawing at my shoulders as I walked. The deeper I ventured, the more the forest enveloped me, the weight of its silence pressing against my ears. I could feel the ground softening beneath my feet, the earth almost alive, pulsating with a rhythm that resonated deep in my bones. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a small clearing, far more open than the thickets surrounding it. At its center lay a stone altar, covered in vines and moss, the edges worn and weathered as if it had been there for centuries. Strange symbols adorned its surface, swirling together in a dance of the forgotten. I approached cautiously, my breath hitching in my throat. It was clear that this place had been used for something dark, something long buried in the annals of time. An irresistible urge to touch the altar grew within me. I reached out, fingertips brushing against the cool stone. As I did, the forest seemed to shudder. A low murmur rose around me, a chorus of whispers that felt like a warning. Panic coursed through my veins. I turned to leave, my feet moving faster than my mind could process, but the forest had shifted. The path I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a tangle of branches and creeping shadows. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest, echoing my fear. I stumbled backward, trying to find my way as the darkness closed in. The trees appeared alive, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, and the air turned frigid. I felt the presence again, closer now, looming just out of sight yet impossible to ignore. My pulse quickened, and dread coiled in my stomach. Just as I thought I might be swallowed whole by the night, I caught a glimpse of a woman in white. Her figure stood at the edge of the clearing, ethereal and translucent, her long hair flowing like mist. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound escaped. The world around me twisted, and the darkness surged, swallowing the last glimmers of light. In that moment, I understood that the stories were real. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows across the edge of Blackwood Forest. I stood there, wood smoke curling from the chimney of my childhood home, staring at the gnarled trees that loomed like sentinels guarding some dark secret. It had been days since I'd returned to this place, days filled with sleepless nights and whispered conversations with the villagers. The stories, the warnings, clung to me like the lingering mist that rolled off the forest floor. I could feel my heart racing with a mix of dread and curiosity. My grandmother had often recounted chilling tales of the spirits that roamed the woods, echoing the cries of the lost. She had always told them in a low voice, as if speaking above a whisper would stir up the phantoms. I had listened with wide eyes, wrapped in blankets, the soft glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. Now, those stories felt far too real. As darkness enveloped the forest, I found myself on the old, familiar path that led to its entrance. Each step felt like a betrayal of my senses, wary and alert. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the trees themselves were breathing, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. I knew the tales, how beings lost to the forest wandered eternally, luring the curious deeper into their embrace. I pressed forward, driven by a need to confront whatever haunted this place. The underbrush rustled. I froze, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved but the wind, whispering secrets I could not understand. The moonlight fought to penetrate the dense canopy, and what little light it offered danced on the ground, creating an illusion of movement. It was then I heard it, a soft, almost melodic humming. My breath caught as I strained to listen. The sound seemed to swirl around me, pulling me closer to its source. I had to know what it was. The stories of the lost souls drifted back to me, but I silenced them, forcing my feet to press onward. The path twisted and turned, and the trees closed in tighter, their bark gnarled and twisted. The hum became clearer, beckoning, weaving through the branches. I stumbled upon a clearing, moonlight spilling down like a spotlight on an ancient stone circle, overgrown with vines and moss. It looked untouched by time, yet it felt wrong. The air shimmered with an energy that prickled my skin, a mix of curiosity and foreboding. I stepped closer, the humming intensifying, wrapping around me like a blanket. Glancing around, I noticed the ground was littered with small trinkets, a broken locket, a child's toy, shards of ceramic. I felt my heart sink. Each piece felt like a testament to those who had wandered into the forest and never returned. The stories were real. This was a graveyard of lost memories, forgotten by the world. Suddenly, the humming stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed against my ears. I turned, scanning the darkness, a sense of being watched creeping over me. It was then I spotted movement at the edge of the trees. A figure materialized in the shadows, a woman cloaked in a tattered dress that swayed with the breeze, her hair a tangled mass cascading over her shoulders. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello? Are you lost?" She remained still, her eyes glimmering like polished stones, unblinking, as if sizing me up. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by an unseen force. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it resonated deeply, chilling my bones. I have waited so long to be free. Every tale my grandmother told surged back, the warnings etched into my mind. I had heard of the spirits that were trapped, forever longing for release, and yet here I stood, teetering on the edge of curiosity and terror. "Please," she implored, her mouth twisting into a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "You have to help me find the others." In that instant, I understood. She wasn't just lost, she was part of the forest, bound to it like a prisoner in chains. The stories weren't merely warnings, they were a plea. My heart raced, a primal urge to flee urging me onward, but the fascination held me fast. I wanted to ask her how, to know the truth of what had happened to her and those she sought, but words caught in my throat. The air thickened, the trees creaked ominously. The shadows behind her began to swirl, coiling like smoke, forming shapes that flickered in and out of existence. "Join us," she said, her voice rising with an otherworldly echo. "We can be free together." The temptation clawed at me. I felt the pull of the forest, its secrets urging me to step closer. But a part of me screamed to resist, to remember the laughter of my grandmother, the warmth of home. I took a step back, the ground crunching underfoot. The figure's expression darkened, and a flash of anger ignited in her eyes. "You must choose," she hissed, her voice growing more urgent, more desperate. I stumbled backward, turning on my heel to flee before the darkness could swallow me whole. The echoes of her voice chased me as I ran, the shadows stretching, reaching. I dashed through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, but I couldn't stop. My heart thundered in my chest, a wild drumbeat dragging me back to the safety of the light. When I finally burst into the clearing of my childhood home, I collapsed against the door, gasping for breath. The woods waited behind me, dark and foreboding. I felt their hunger, their pull, but I also felt the weight of their despair. I knew the tales were more than stories. They were warnings of what lay in the shadows. I had stepped into the forest, but it seemed the forest was not done with me. The air hung thick with an uneasy stillness as I stepped deeper into the heart of Elder's Wood. Each crunch of twigs underfoot echoed louder than the last, disrupting the silence that clung to the trees like a shroud. I had come here in search of answers, but with each passing moment, the forest seemed to close in around me, wrapping its gnarled fingers tighter, urging me to leave. It had been 3 weeks since my brother, Malcolm, vanished. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and frantic searching. The townsfolk whispered of Elder's Wood, their voices dropping to hushed tones when they spoke of the hauntings, the lost souls that wandered its shadows. I had brushed their warnings aside, finding comfort in my disbelief. Now, standing among the towering oaks, I regretted my arrogance. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above, casting dappled shadows that danced ominously across the ground. I recalled the old stories, the ones about those who entered the forest and never returned. I hadn't believed in the supernatural, but as I wandered, I felt the weight of their tales bearing down upon me. I could almost hear their whispers, urging me to turn back. With a shaking breath, I pressed on, guided by the flimsy resolve forged from desperation. I clutched the flashlight in my hand like a lifeline, the beam cutting through the dimness, illuminating the twisted roots and knotted branches that clawed at my ankles. I had marked the path on my phone, a route through the forest that Malcolm had spoken of in his frantic messages before he disappeared. He had described it as a shortcut, a way to reach the old stone bridge where he and I had played as children. That bridge loomed in my mind, a relic of simpler times, now overshadowed by the dread of its isolation. With each step, memories of Malcolm surged forth, threatening to overwhelm me. I could hear his laughter echoing through the trees, a haunting specter of the past. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago, yet the pain of his absence felt fresh, unbearable. I reached a clearing and paused, scanning the area for any sign of him. The sunlight broke through in streaks, illuminating patches of wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. It was beautiful, yet something about it felt wrong. The flowers bent unnaturally, as if bowing to an unseen force. Chills danced down my spine. I forced myself to breathe and pressed on, my resolve faltering with every glance at the towering trees that loomed like silent sentinels. As I walked, the forest seemed to come alive. I could hear the rustle of leaves, not from the wind, but from something lurking just out of sight. A chill crept into my bones, and I quickened my pace. The shadows stretched and twisted, and I felt eyes upon me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the rising panic. Then, an unmistakable sound shattered the quiet, a faint cry, distant but unmistakable. My heart raced, pumping adrenaline through my veins. I dropped my flashlight, its beam flickering before dying in the encroaching dark. In that moment, the forest swallowed me whole. Malcolm. The desperate thought propelled me forward, guided by instinct. I felt my way through the underbrush, reaching out for the familiar, the safety of my brother. The woods shifted and groaned around me, and I stumbled, my foot caught on the roots of a nearby tree. I fell hard, scraping my hands against the rough earth, and that's when I noticed it, a trail of torn fabric fluttering like a flag in the breeze. I clutched the fabric, my fingers trembling. It was a piece of Malcolm's jacket, frayed and stained with something dark. I stood, the reality of its presence anchoring me to the earth. Panic clawed at my insides, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to find him. Pressing deeper into the forest, the cries grew louder, rising and falling like a morbid song. I called out his name, my voice breaking through the suffocating silence, only to be met with an eerie stillness. My heart thundered in my chest, and a primal fear gripped me. I pushed forward, my determination battling the encroaching dread. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead like skeletal fingers grasping for the sky. I moved through the thicket, the underbrush scratching at my skin. The cries transformed into anguished wails, echoing through the trees. I stumbled onto a moss-covered path, its surface dark and damp, leading me deeper still into the forest's grip. A sudden chill swept through the air as something shifted among the branches. I turned, feeling a presence at my back, but when I spun around, nothing remained but the swaying trees. My breath quickened, and I resumed my hurried pace, desperate to find that flicker of hope amidst the despair. Then, I saw it, a flicker of movement in the distance. I broke into a sprint, my feet pounding against the earth, adrenaline surging through me. As I drew closer, I spotted a figure, hunched and shadowy, moving in and out of the trees. Malcolm. I shouted, praying against the rising dread. The figure turned, and I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't my brother. The face that stared back was gaunt and hollow, its eyes sunken and devoid of life. A low, guttural sound escaped its lips, and the air thickened with an unnatural weight. My heart raced, and the world around me blurred. I turned and fled, branches snapping like bones as I pushed through the underbrush, the forest closing in behind me. The wails surrounded me now, a cacophony of lost souls trapped in their eternal torment. I ran blindly, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. The ground shifted beneath me, and the trees loomed taller, their branches stretching out like grasping hands. I felt the breath of something ancient and malevolent on my neck as I tore through the labyrinth of elder's wood. I had to escape. I had to find Malcolm. But as I ran, the whispers grew louder, urging me to stop, to listen, to succumb. I could feel the forest's presence wrapping around me, its tendrils pulling me back, ensnaring me in its depths. The last remnants of daylight faded, leaving me in a realm of shadows. Desperation clouded me, but I pressed on, driven by a flicker of hope that somehow, somewhere, I would find my brother and escape this cursed place. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep blue. I found myself standing at the edge of the forest again, that accursed place where shadows twisted like fingers eager to pull me into their depths. The trees loomed higher than I remembered, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal hands reaching out to ensnare anything foolhardy enough to venture near. My friends had been gone too long. With every passing hour, my anxiety deepened. I hadn't expected to feel this hollowed out, this desperate. We had come to the woods in search of adventure, but what lay ahead now felt less like exploration and more like a descent into madness. The few jokes we had shared before our expedition faded into silence, swallowed by the heavy air. It was just me and the whispering trees, their voices a soft susurration, teasing and taunting in a language I could not understand. I recalled Adrian's laughter as we entered the forest, confident we could conquer anything nature threw at us. Those haunted tales? Just stories. We'll be fine, he had said, brushing off the warnings of the locals. I had wanted to believe him, to revel in the thrill of the unknown. But now, standing alone, I wondered if he was right or if I had been blind to the warnings that echoed in my mind. The sun slipped away completely, the twilight swallowing any remnants of light. Unease twisted in my stomach like a coiling serpent. I called out for them, my voice breaking the thick silence, but only the rustle of leaves answered back. A chill crept along my spine, and I shivered, acutely aware of the growing darkness around me. I leaned against an ancient oak, its bark rough beneath my fingers, and closed my eyes for a moment. Maybe if I stood still, I could convince myself everything was fine. Maybe they would return soon, laughing at my worry. But as the minutes crawled by, an unsettling thought wormed its way into my mind. What if they didn't come back? My heart raced with an unshakable dread, and against my better judgment, I ventured into the forest again, retracing the steps we had taken hours before. The path was obscured, the underbrush thicker than I remembered, branches scratching at my arms as if trying to pull me back, warning me to turn around. Still, I pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. I had to find them. I called their names into the stillness. Adrian. Sarah. The names echoed back to me, distorted, as if the forest itself were mocking my desperation. I picked up the pace, heart pounding in rhythm with the rustling leaves overhead. The air thickened with a sense of being watched, and I felt eyes lingering on me from the dark, unseen. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the forest playing tricks, but the primal part of my brain screamed otherwise. Deeper I went, my footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and just when I thought I caught a fleeting shape darting between the trees, I spun around, heart racing, only to find nothing but the stillness of the woods. frustration mingled with fear. "Stop messing around," I shouted, my voice cracking. I regretted it immediately. The forest swallowed my words, leaving only a heavy silence in their wake. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my sense of direction slipping away as the darkness deepened. The faint sound of rushing water reached my ears. I remembered the stream we had crossed earlier, a small glint of silver under the sun. Hope surged within me. If I could just reach the stream, I could follow it back to where we began. I redirected my path, praying fervently I had not wandered too far. But the sounds of the forest shifted, becoming almost oppressive. The rustle of leaves turned into a cacophony of whispers, indistinct and haunting. I paused, fear washing over me as I strained to listen. It was as if the very trees were recounting stories of those who had come before, of lost souls who had entered the forest only to vanish without a trace. My heart thundered in my chest as another sound cut through the whispers, a faint cry. Was it human? Was it them? I hesitated, the instinct to flee at odds with my desperate need to find my friends. The sound came again, clearer this time, a muffled scream carried by the wind. Without thinking, I ran toward it, each step feeling heavier, each breath coming out in short gasps as I pushed through the dense underbrush. I broke through the tree line and stumbled to the stream. The moonlight bathed the water in a ghostly glow, but it was the shadowy figure kneeling on the bank that froze me in place. "Sarah?" I whispered in disbelief, heart racing with both recognition and fear. She looked up, eyes wide and glazed, her hair disheveled and her clothes stained with mud. Help me," she gasped, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. But as I stepped closer, I felt something shift in the air, an ancient, malevolent energy that crackled like static electricity. A shadow moved behind her, dark and formless, rising from the depths of the forest like a predator ready to claim its prey. "Run!" she screamed, her voice sharp and desperate. But before I could react, the shadow enveloped her, swallowing her scream, and a chill gripped my heart. I stumbled back, fear anchoring me to the ground as the whispers grew louder, a monstrous choir of the lost and the damned. That was when I understood. This forest was alive, feeding off despair, absorbing the lost souls of those who had entered. I turned to escape, heart racing, realizing I might be the next victim if I didn't act fast. The path behind me seemed to close, the trees shifting in my peripheral vision, intent on keeping me trapped. The darkness surged forward, eager to claim me. I ran, propelled by sheer survival instinct, casting one last glance at the cursed hollow from which I had come. I could not allow it to take me too. I had to find a way out. I had to escape. The air was still, a heavy blanket of silence that clung to me as I stood at the edge of the forest. The trees towered like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out, inviting yet foreboding. I had never intended to walk into the woods again after what happened 2 nights ago, but the chilling whispers of the townsfolk haunted me, echoing in my mind. They spoke of the forest as if it were a living entity, breathing and watching, and now I felt the weight of those tales pressing down on my chest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous hues of deep purple and black, I took a step forward, drawn by an invisible force. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, the ground crunchy beneath my feet, a mosaic of twigs and fallen leaves. I tried to control my breathing, but each inhalation felt heavier than the last, as if I were drawing in the very essence of the forest, ripe with fear and sorrow. "Don't be a fool," I muttered to myself. The phrase had become a mantra, but the lure of the woods was powerful. I had to know, had to understand what had happened to my friends. Jeremy and Lisa had vanished, swallowed by the shadows, and all I had were the last, frantic moments replaying in my mind. Their laughter fading, screams lost to the wind. I pressed deeper into the thicket, branches scraping against my arms like fingers grasping at my skin. The stories had warned of the wood's deceitful nature, how it twisted paths, how it disoriented those who dared to wander. Time felt irrelevant here. Minutes stretched into hours as each step led me further from the world I knew. I tried to recall the way I had come, but the forest closed in around me, the familiar paths morphing into an alien landscape. Then I heard it, a rustling behind me. I turned, heart racing, but there was nothing but the shifting shadows, the whispering leaves. My skin prickled, and I chastised myself for being jumpy. "It's just the wind," I whispered, hoping the words would soothe my racing heart. But the wind seemed to carry more than just the sound of rustling leaves. It brought with it a low hum, a resonance that vibrated through my bones. I strained to listen, moving toward the source, anxiety clawing at the edges of my mind. It pulsed like a heartbeat, rhythmic and insistent. I could almost make out words, haunting echoes that slipped through the trees like dark secrets. "Help us! Help us!" I froze, the hair on my neck standing on end. It was a voice, a chorus of voices, familiar yet distant. It reminded me of Jeremy and Lisa, but distorted, twisted by the woods. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, my pulse quickening. "It's not real. It can't be." Yet the allure of those voices drew me closer, urging me to delve deeper. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my frantic pace quickening, compelled to answer the call. What if they were still alive? What if they were trapped, desperate for rescue? The forest thickened, the canopy blocking out the last remnants of sunlight. I felt the darkness wrap around me, a suffocating shroud. I paused, panic flooding my senses. I had no flashlight, no means to find my way back. My breath quickened, and I considered turning, but the voices grew louder, more insistent. "Come to us! Come to us!" I pressed onward, the ground uneven, slippery with decay, until I broke into a small clearing. The air buzzed, alive with an energy that both terrified and exhilarated me. In the center lay an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered like dark eyes watching my every move. The whispers seemed to originate from within, swirling around me, beckoning me to enter. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach. This place bore the marks of neglect and despair, the stories of lost souls echoing through the creaking wood and rotting beams. I thought of the townsfolk's warnings, of how the forest took what it desired, never returning it. But what choice did I have? I stepped forward, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Shadows danced in the corners, and the silence felt alive, pregnant with secrets. The interior was sparse, rusted tools hung on the walls, and a table lay strewn with old, yellowed papers. I reached for one, its brittle surface crackling under my fingers. It spoke of disappearances, tales of those who had entered the forest and never returned. Names I recognized. Names I had heard whispered in hushed tones at the diner. "Jeremy," I breathed, the name a prayer, a plea. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back of the cabin, like something heavy had fallen. My heart raced, and I froze, the shadows around me deepening. I took a shaky breath, half expecting to see Jeremy or Lisa emerge, their faces pale and gaunt. "Guys?" I called, my voice trembling. In response, the whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of despair. "Help us! Save us!" The walls of the cabin seemed to lean in, the air growing thick with dread. I stepped back, unsteady on my feet, fighting the urge to flee. But then I saw it, a figure, indistinct at first, trembling in the corner of the room. I blinked hard, focusing through the darkness. It was a woman, her hair long and matted, her eyes wide with something I couldn't decipher, fear, anger, or perhaps a desperate plea. "Help me," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper, and I felt myself drawn closer. The air grew heavier, a palpable force wrapping around me, making it hard to breathe. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the coolness of her arm. But in an instant, she vanished. The room swirled around me, and I staggered backward, colliding with the table, sending papers flying like autumn leaves. The whispers grew frantic, a symphony of voices rising around me, and I realized why I had stumbled into a nexus of lost souls, caught between worlds, pleading for release. The realization sent a chill coursing through my veins. I had to leave. I turned, but the door slammed shut, a deafening finality. The shadows clawed at my legs, the whispers morphing into screams, and I understood that the forest had claimed another victim. I was trapped, ensnared in a web of darkness, and the only way out was to confront the truth that lay within. In that moment, with the desperate cries echoing in my ears, I knew I had only begun to scratch the surface of the horror that awaited me in this haunted forest. Story 6, Last Voyage of the Soulbound. The ocean had always captivated me, a vast canvas of blue stretching beyond the horizon, dotted with waves that whispered secrets of the deep. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the grinding monotony of everyday life. So, when I received an invitation to join a luxury cruise aboard the Silver Horizon, I felt as though I had won the lottery. Little did I know that this journey would lead me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Embarking from the grand port of San Francisco, the ship was a marvel, its sleek lines and shimmering hull glinting under the afternoon sun. Passengers, a mix of young couples, families, and retirees, jostled through the grand entrance, their laughter and excitement drowning out any lingering doubts I might have had. My own anticipation surged as I stepped aboard, greeted by the scent of polished wood and sea air mingling together. The cabins were a revelation, spacious and luxuriously outfitted, complete with balcony views of the endless ocean. As I unpacked, the ship's atmosphere enveloped me like a warm embrace. I stood on the balcony, watching the shoreline recede until it was nothing more than a blur on the horizon. There was something exhilarating about the vast emptiness surrounding us, yet beneath my thrill, a twinge of unease settled in. My initial doubts faded as the first evening unfolded. I dined on exquisite cuisine, mingling with fellow passengers, each with their own story. There was the elderly couple reminiscing about their adventures in Europe, the young artist sketching the sunset, and a solitary woman who seemed lost in thought. It was an idyllic scene, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. But a subtle chill crept through the air, something unnameable that I couldn't quite place. The next day, I awoke to a thick fog enveloping the ship. The sun struggled to break through the dense clouds, casting the world in a muted gray. The atmosphere changed with the weather, laughter was replaced by hushed conversation, and a sense of unease settled over the passengers like a heavy blanket. I ventured out on deck, the fog swirling around me. I felt as though I was the only one aware of the unsettling silence that had descended, the laughter of the previous day a distant memory. By midday, the fog had thickened to an almost surreal degree. I made my way to the ship's observation deck, hoping for a glimpse of sunlight and a break from the oppressive haze. As I leaned against the railing, staring into the gray abyss, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I could have sworn I heard whispers, voices carried on the wind, but when I turned, I found nothing but empty decks. Later that evening, the captain made an announcement. We were to change course due to the fog, diverting us further out to sea. Though the news was met with murmurs of concern, I dismissed it. I was determined to enjoy my vacation, to push aside the shadows creeping into my thoughts. Dinner was extravagant, and I found myself laughing along with the others, yet the feeling of being watched gnawed at me. I glanced over my shoulder, but each time, I found only strangers immersed in their own revelry. As the night wore on, the fog thickened even further, forming an impenetrable wall that swallowed the ship. The lights flickered occasionally, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I excused myself from the dining area, feeling a growing sense of claustrophobia. Outside, the deck was deserted, shrouded in an oppressive silence. I walked toward the bow, hoping to find some respite in the open air. But it was there, standing by the railing, that I first saw it, a figure, barely discernible, moving in the fog. I squinted, heart racing, trying to discern its shape. It seemed to sway, a dark silhouette against the white mist. I called out, my voice cracking as I took a hesitant step forward. "Hello? Is someone there?" No response came, only the haunting sound of the waves crashing against the ship. A sickening knot formed in my stomach, a primal instinct warning me to retreat. I turned to leave, but the figure seemed to shift, drawing nearer. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears, and suddenly, it was gone, swallowed whole by the fog. I was left standing there, breathless and trembling, uncertain of what I had just witnessed. I rushed back inside, the warmth of the ship feeling like a protective cocoon. I found a corner in the lounge, sinking into a plush chair while trying to calm my racing heart. The groans of the ship echoed in the background, but the whispers remained, teasing me from the corners of my mind. I stole glances around the room, scrutinizing the faces of strangers. Were they aware of the figure, or was I losing my grip on reality? As the night wore on, the fog refused to relent. I retreated to my cabin, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself it was simply the disorientation brought on by the fog. But sleep eluded me, the sounds of the ship creaking and the faint whispers weaving through the air gnawing at my sanity. With the first light of dawn, I resolved to forget the events of the previous night. I joined the others for breakfast, forcing myself to engage in idle chatter. Yet, beneath the surface, the dread lingered, festering like an untreated wound. Each time I looked out at the fog-bound waters, I felt a gnawing sense of foreboding. But as the day progressed, things began to change. Passengers started to vanish. First, it was a couple I had seen at dinner, their absence noticed only when they failed to show up for breakfast. Then, a child went missing, his laughter silenced by the fog. Panic began to ripple through the ship, though the crew insisted everything was under control. The unease that once nagged at me transformed into a palpable fear. I could sense it in the air, a dark undercurrent weaving through the conversations, an unspoken knowledge that something was terribly wrong. I attempted to piece together the events, but all I had was that fleeting figure, lurking just beyond reach. As night fell once more and the fog thickened around us, I realized that this was no ordinary cruise. The silver horizon held more than just passengers. It was a vessel of secrets, and whatever lurked in the haze was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to claim its next victim. The next morning dawned overcast, heavy clouds hanging low above the ocean, their gray tendrils stretching like fingers toward the ship. I awoke with the faint memory of a dream gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, something about shadows lurking in the corners, but the details slipped away as the ship's gentle rocking cradled me back to sleep. I stumbled out of bed, the air thick with the scent of salt and stale coffee. I pulled back the heavy curtain, revealing an indifferent sea that mirrored the drab sky. My stomach growled, a reminder that I hadn't eaten since the scant breakfast the day before. I dressed quickly, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut, and headed to the dining hall. The ship felt emptier than it had the day before. I brushed past a few crew members, their expressions just as somber as the weather outside. I noticed them exchanging glances, whispers escaping their lips like smoke. It set my nerves on edge. By the time I reached the dining area, it was nearly deserted. A few passengers shuffled about, their faces drawn, eyes glazed and distant, as if they were haunted by something just beyond perception. I opted for a seat near the window. Outside, the waves crashed against the hull, a rhythm that should have been soothing yet felt oppressive. I poured myself a cup of coffee, each sip bitter as I scanned the room. Most tables were empty, but a couple sat in the far corner, voices hushed, laughter trailing off as if they were discussing something they shouldn't be. "Did you hear what happened last night?" a woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the ship's machinery. What could they possibly have to worry about? Her companion replied, a touch too loudly, glancing around as if the walls had ears. It's just a cruise. This is supposed to be fun. I leaned in, pretending to adjust my napkin, straining to hear more. But their conversation shifted to mundane topics, and the feeling of foreboding returned to settle in my stomach like a stone. I had to shake it off. Perhaps this was all part of some elaborate joke, people concocting tales to spice up their voyage. I focused on my coffee, forcing myself to enjoy the warmth rather than dwell on the inexplicable tension in the air. After breakfast, I decided to explore the ship, hoping the act of moving would lift my spirits. I wandered through the narrow hallways lined with garish paintings of ocean vistas, each one more exaggerated than the last. I passed the spa area, where an overly cheerful attendant handed out brochures, her smile a stark contrast to the gloom that seemed to shroud the vessel. As I stepped onto the deck, the wind whipped at my hair, and I felt a sense of freedom. The sea stretched endlessly before me, waves cresting and crashing, a blue abyss that seemed to swallow all light. I leaned against the railing, closing my eyes and taking in the salty breeze. Yet, there was something unsettling about the vastness before me, an isolation that gnawed at my thoughts. A scream pierced the air, shattering the moment of tranquility. I spun around, heart racing, eyes scanning the deck. A small crowd had gathered near the side of the ship, drawn to something unseen. Apprehension twisted my gut as I forced myself to move closer. The sounds of hurried footsteps echoed behind me, more passengers converging on the scene. Curiosity piqued. What happened? I asked a man near the back, his face pale and tight-lipped. Someone fell, he whispered, his gaze locked on the crowd. They. Don't you dare say it, another passenger interrupted, shaking her head vigorously. They're just being dramatic. But the murmurs grew louder, and the tension coiled like a spring in my chest. I pushed through the throng, the crowd parting as I arrived at the front. What I saw made my heart drop. A woman lay sprawled across the deck, her lifeless body twisted unnaturally. The crew had already begun to clear the area, faces grim, their usual composure shattered. As they worked, a deep sense of dread crawled up my spine. I could see the faintest hints of something else etched across the faces of the crew, something darker lurking behind their expressions. Don't look, someone whispered beside me, a warning laced with panic. But I couldn't pull my gaze away. Her eyes stared blankly toward the sky, a haunting emptiness that echoed the distant thunder rumbling above. I felt a sharp pang of sorrow, mixed with an inexplicable dread. How could this happen? She had been so full of life just hours before, and now she was just gone. The ship's captain appeared, his brow furrowed, and he spoke to the crew in hushed tones. I tried to glean more information, but the voices were clipped and urgent. I stepped back from the crowd, feeling suffocated by the weight of the tragedy unfolding. As the crew moved the body away, I caught a glimpse of something on the ground in Eerie, dark stains seeping into the wood of the deck. My stomach churned as I turned away, unable to shake the image from my mind. The storm rolled in suddenly, clouds blotting out the sun as the first raindrops began to fall. I rushed inside, seeking refuge from the tumult. The corridors felt like a maze, the walls closing in, the echoes of fear and uncertainty spiraling around me. I needed to find someone to talk to, perhaps an officer who could explain what had happened. But every door I knocked on met with silence, and the dimly lit hallways felt more like a labyrinth of dread than a vacation vessel. I rounded a corner, only to collide with a man in a suit, his eyes sharp as he took a step back. Sorry, I mumbled, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stared at me, an unsettling intensity in his gaze. Stay safe, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Then he turned abruptly and left me standing there, heart pounding in my chest, the weight of his words wrapping around me like a noose. I felt the ship lurch slightly beneath my feet, The storm brewing outside mirrored in the chaos brewing within. Something was terribly wrong, and I was beginning to realize that this vacation was turning into something far darker than I had ever imagined. The days on the Riptide Queen blurred into one another like the waves against the hull. I had tried to shake off the unease that settled over me like a damp blanket after the first night. The ship, with its opulent chandeliers and gleaming deck, felt less like a luxurious escape and more like a gilded cage. I could no longer ignore the whispers that echoed in the narrow hallways, soft and unsettling, like a ghostly wind. As dusk fell on the fourth day, I stood by my cabin window, staring at the horizon where the sun sank into the ocean, a fiery orb swallowed by shadows. The beauty of the scene was marred by an unease that gnawed at my insides. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong aboard this ship. It had started innocently enough, a misplaced item here, a shadow darting out of sight there. But with each passing hour, it grew into something more sinister. I had spent the afternoon exploring the ship's various decks, trying to distract myself from the unease. The pool area, meant to be lively and inviting, felt eerily silent. A few passengers lounged on deck chairs, yet their laughter seemed forced, as if they were all playing roles in a theatrical production. I noticed a couple in the corner sharing furtive glances, their conversation hushed, laden with tension. I felt like an intruder in their shared discomfort. Later, I wandered down to the lower decks, hoping to find something familiar among the less traveled corridors. Instead, I stumbled upon the galley, where the scent of frying fish and spices hung in the air. The kitchen staff looked up, their faces masked by simple white caps and focused expressions. I felt a sense of relief. They were busy, their energy infectious. I thought about joining them, but as I lingered, I noticed one of the cooks, a tall man with deep-set eyes, staring at me with a strange intensity. His gaze unnerved me, and I quickly backed away. The evening entertainment was a comedy show in the main lounge. I sat with a drink in hand, forcing myself to laugh at the comedian's jokes, yet the audience's laughter felt hollow, almost desperate. I noticed a woman sitting alone in a corner, her eyes fixed on the stage, but I could see the fear behind her smile. A chill rushed through me. Why were we all here, laughing and drinking, when fear lurked in the shadows? After the show, I decided to head back to my cabin. The long corridor felt different tonight, darker, somehow. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, casting erratic shadows that danced along the polished floor. The whispers I had heard before were louder now, murmuring in tongues I couldn't decipher. I paused outside my cabin, every instinct urging me to turn back, but I pushed the door open. Inside, I was greeted by an unsettling sight. My suitcase lay open, clothes scattered across the floor. I hadn't left it like this. Panic coursed through me as I hurriedly checked under the bed and in the closet, half expecting to find someone hiding there. Nothing. Just the suffocating silence of my own thoughts. I closed the door behind me, locking it with trembling fingers. As I gathered my belongings, a faint scratching sound resonated from somewhere beyond the wood. My heart raced, and I froze, listening intently. It was as if something or someone was trying to claw its way through the walls. I pressed my ear against the door, the sound now mingling with the low hum of the ship's engine and the soft swells of the ocean. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed down the corridor, making me jump back. I scrambled to the peephole, but the view outside was shrouded in darkness. No one else seemed to notice the disturbance, yet I felt the oppressive weight of dread settle heavily upon my chest. With adrenaline pulsing through my veins, I grabbed my phone and considered calling for help, but something held me back. What if no one believed me? What if they thought I was losing my mind? I padded silently across the room, peering through the curtains. My reflection stared back, a ghostly visage framed by the dim light. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I needed to escape this place. It wasn't just the disturbances, I had a creeping sense that the ship itself was alive, hungry, and waiting. Compelled by desperation, I reached for the door again, intent on finding someone, anyone. I twisted the knob and stepped into the hall. The corridor was empty, the eerie quiet amplifying the pounding of my heart. I moved cautiously, each creak of the floorboards echoing in my ears. As I approached the stairs leading to the upper decks, I noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, stretching and swirling in the dim light. But the scratching had returned, more frantic now. It sounded closer, as if whatever was making that sound was on the other side of the wall. I hesitated, torn between the need to discover the source and the primal urge to flee. With decision made, I bolted toward the stairwell, urgency pulsing through my veins. I needed to find out what was happening on this ship. As I raced up the stairs, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices swirling around me. My breath quickened, and I pushed through the door onto the upper deck, where the wind howled like a banshee, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of dread. The ocean roared below, waves crashing violently against the hull, and I could taste the salt in the air. My heart raced as I scanned the empty deck, the only company the distant wail of the sea. In that moment, I knew I had stepped into something much darker than I had ever anticipated. The Riptide Queen was not merely a ship, it was a predator, and I was its prey. The next day dawned with a muted heaviness that seemed to cling to the air on the cruise ship, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. I awoke to the sound of waves slapping against the hull, an eerie lullaby that had grown ever more ominous over the past few days. The smell of salt permeated the cabin, mingling with something else, something metallic. I shook off the sense of dread that had settled in my gut and stepped into the corridor. The ship felt quieter than usual. The usual bustle of passengers, their laughter mingling with the clinking of glasses, was replaced by a deep silence. Only a couple of crew members were visible, their faces tight, eyes flickering nervously as they hastened past me. I pressed my lips together, feeling a strange urge to follow them, but instead I headed towards the upper deck, where I hoped to find some semblance of normalcy. As I climbed the stairs, I recalled the unsettling events of the previous night, the disappearing passengers and the recurring whispers that lured me toward the bow. I gripped the railing, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. My heart raced as I navigated through the desolate dining area. The tables were set for breakfast, untouched, with plates still gleaming under the artificial lights. I felt an involuntary shiver run down my spine. The ship had become a ghost, and I was the only living soul left on board. I stepped outside, and the warm sun greeted me, momentarily dispelling the chill that had settled over my thoughts. The ocean stretched infinitely to the horizon, a shimmering blue blank canvas. But as I leaned against the railing, staring out, I noticed something dark bobbing in the distance. My heart quickened. It was hard to tell at this distance, but it seemed to be a lifeboat, abandoned in a drift, a ghostly apparition on the surface of the waves. "Hey!" I shouted, half hoping someone would respond. But the only reply was the echo of my own voice, fading into the vast emptiness around me. I turned back to re-enter the ship, the sense of security outside fading rapidly. As I stepped inside, a chill coursed through me, a prickling sensation at the nape of my neck. I retraced my steps towards the cabin, but the corridor felt different now, as if the walls were closing in. I stopped briefly, hearing the faint echoes of voices. They floated toward me, just on the edge of comprehension, soft and beckoning. I pressed my ear to the door of a nearby cabin, the voices growing clearer, yet still indistinct. The sound of laughter mixed with a low, deep hum that made my stomach twist. I knocked lightly, but the laughter stopped abruptly, and I stood there, feeling foolish. I turned on my heel and continued to my cabin, fighting against the urge to run. Once inside, I locked the door behind me. I leaned against it, breathing heavily, and surveyed the small space that had become my prison. I had no idea where everyone had gone. What had happened to the crew? To the other passengers? My mind was a tempest of questions, tinged with dread. I glanced at my phone. No signal. Of course. The ship had become a floating island, cut off from the world. As the hours slipped by, time lost its meaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even in the stillness. The ship creaked and groaned as it rolled with the waves, but I could swear I heard footsteps outside my door, steady and purposeful. I pressed my back against the wall and strained to listen, heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps eventually faded, but the feeling of unease remained, tangible and suffocating. I attempted to distract myself by rifling through my belongings. The familiar weight of my journal brought me some comfort as I flipped through the pages. But my thoughts soon spiraled back to the strange atmosphere. I needed to know what was happening. The lure of the unknown gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I resolved to gather my courage and explore the ship once more. Carefully, I opened the door, peering into the dimly lit corridor. The silence lay thick like fog, making every creak of the ship sound like a whisper. I took a deep breath and stepped out, determined to find answers. I moved cautiously, my footsteps muffled against the plush carpet. The first place I headed was the crew area, a decision driven by the hope of uncovering the truth. The ship's bowels were dark and labyrinthine, the narrow hallways twisting and turning like an ever-shifting maze. I navigated deeper, pausing at a large door marked crew only. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. With trembling fingers, I grasped the handle and pushed. The door swung open with an ominous creak. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with the scent of oil and sweat. A long table stood at the center, cluttered with charts and maps. I stepped inside, scanning the room for any signs of life. On the far wall, a small bulletin board hung, covered in safety notices and schedules. But one piece of paper caught my eye, crumpled and torn, a hand-drawn map of the ship. The paths were marked with red ink, leading to an area that seemed strangely familiar. It was labeled Restricted Access. My pulse quickened. That area had been off limits even before the strange occurrences began. I felt a pull towards it, a mix of curiosity and fear coursing through me. With a final look around, I pocketed the map and stepped back into the corridor, my resolve hardening. Whatever was happening on this ship, I needed to uncover the truth. I had to find out who or what was behind the disappearances. As I turned to follow the path indicated on the map, a cold wind swept through the corridor, chilling me to the bone. I paused, feeling a shiver race down my spine as a soft whisper echoed in the darkness. I steeled myself, pushing forward into the unknown, the shadows deepening around me. I had no idea of the horrors that awaited. I awoke to the sound of waves lapping against the hull, a constant reminder that we were still at sea. The rhythmic motion of the ship carried a disquieting promise, as if the ocean itself conspired with something far more sinister lurking beneath its surface. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, the heavy curtain of night still shrouding the cabin in darkness. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, casting momentary shadows that danced across the walls, twisting the mundane into something unsettling. Last night, a calm had washed over the ship, one that had not felt real. The crew members had seemed distant, their faces devoid of emotion as they went about their duties. I had dismissed it as simple exhaustion. After all, we had been sailing for days, the endless horizon stretching before us like a gaping maw abyss. I recalled how the laughter of my fellow passengers felt forced and hollow, echoing through the grand dining hall where we had shared our last meal. It was as if the joy had evaporated, leaving behind only the residue of unease. As I swung my legs out of bed, a shiver crept up my spine. I wasn't prepared for what awaited me outside my cabin, but I felt compelled to leave. The ship beckoned, a strange curiosity pulling me toward the unknown. I dressed quickly, my heart thrumming as I stepped into the narrow corridor lined with doors, each one a gateway to someone else's experience. The air hung thick with a clammy chill, the kind that heralds a storm. I pressed forward, passing the row of silent cabins. Lost souls, I thought, perhaps still dreaming of distant lands or trapped in nightmares far worse than their reality. I paused at a door marked with a faded number, my mind racing back to the faces of those I had encountered over the past few days. The older couple who had been playing cards, the young family with the giggling children, and the solitary man who rarely spoke, his eyes haunted by some unseen terror. A loud crash echoed from somewhere above, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My heart raced, and I took off towards the stairs leading up to the upper deck. The ship swayed gently beneath me as I navigated the dimly lit passage, fear gripping my chest like a vice. Once outside, I was greeted by an eerie silence. The deck was empty, the only sound the mournful moan of the wind whipping through the ship's metal structure. I could barely see a few feet ahead, the darkness swallowing everything but the pale glow of the emergency lights flickering along the edges of the deck. I felt small and vulnerable, a mere pawn on an expansive chessboard where I could be swept away by forces beyond my control. I turned towards the bridge, its silhouette looming against the night sky. Something had gone very wrong. As I made my way forward, the distant sound of voices reached my ears, a mix of confusion and fear. I pressed on, my legs heavy with dread as I approached the source of the commotion. A group had gathered near the railing, their faces illuminated intermittently by the flashes of the ship's emergency lights. I recognized a few of them, the couple with their children, the solitary man, and a few unfamiliar faces wearing expressions of disbelief and panic. I edged closer, straining to catch snippets of their conversation. "Did you see it?" one woman gasped, her hands trembling. "It was right beneath us." "What do you mean, beneath us?" another voice demanded, edged with skepticism. "There's nothing down there but water." "No!" "I swear," she insisted. "I saw something. Something dark, moving fast. It was huge." Skepticism swirled around her like a storm, but I felt my pulse quicken. The ocean had always held mysteries, deep and unfathomable, but I had never entertained the idea that something could be lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from below, sharp and jarring. The crowd gasped collectively, turning toward the source of the sound. My heart raced as I felt a pull toward the staircase leading down into the ship. Against every instinct, I moved closer to the railing, curiosity outweighing my fear. "Shouldn't we go check it out?" I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. The solitary man turned to me, his eyes wide with something unnameable. "You don't want to go down there. Whatever it is, it's best left alone." Before I could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing us all against the railing. The lights flickered wildly, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, they returned, revealing that the group around me was no longer the same. Whispers of uncertainty filled the air, but they were quickly eclipsed by a new sound, an unsettling, low growl that resonated from the depths of the ship. "Did you hear that?" one man whispered, his voice trembling. The murmur of the crowd turned into a cacophony of fear as we felt the ship tremble beneath us, the sound reverberating through the metal structure like the growl of a beast awakening from slumber. I could feel the eyes of the ocean watching, lurking just beyond the hull, and in that moment, I understood that the real terror was not merely the unknown lurking beneath the waves, but the panic and madness that now gripped those around me. As I stared into the darkness, I realized that whatever had been unleashed was not just a creature of the deep, it was something born from our collective fears, a manifestation of the dread that had woven itself into the fabric of our voyage. And in that single moment, I knew we were no longer mere passengers, but prey.